Hey everyone, and welcome back to Dark Sleep Radio. I'm here to share real-life encounters with beings beyond our world, hoping to help you relax and drift off to sleep. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. The desert can play tricks on you, especially near Area 51. I'm Garrett, and I'm not some adventure junkie, just someone who likes exploring old military sites and hearing their hidden stories. That weekend, I drove out alone in my old pickup, with my dog Jasper riding along, mostly seeking an escape from city noise. During the annual Rachel, Nevada festival, crowds of curious tourists and conspiracy enthusiasts gather, creating the perfect cover. I knew the base was strictly off limits, but with everyone distracted, I thought I might slip through the perimeter roads for a closer look. The night was cold and dry, the kind of desert chill that seeps right through your jacket. A thin haze softened the horizon, blurring the base's blinking floodlights. I parked near some scrub brush about half a mile from the fence and decided to walk the rest of the way. Jasper padded alongside me, ears alert but not nervous. As I crested a small rise, something immediately struck me as wrong. The ground felt unnaturally silent. What I saw on the tarmac under the floodlights was unlike anything I'd ever encountered. This object was so dark it seemed to absorb the light around it, incredibly smooth with no visible seams or markings. Its shape defied description, part kite, part flattened disc, sitting low against the ground. No wings, no propellers, no engines or exhaust. Just this impossible, silent form that looked nothing like any aircraft I'd seen in documentaries or air shows. My heart raced as I carefully pulled out my phone to record, moving slowly to avoid drawing attention. The area was empty, but the silence felt charged with something unexplained. I knew I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the base. Area 51 is seriously off limits. But in that moment, all I could do was watch and wonder. Floodlights flickered above, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. My heart pounded as I zoomed in, framing something on the screen. Then, in an instant, it vanished. No sound, no sparks, no flash, just gone. I dropped my phone in surprise, stepping back. Jasper growled low, his body stiffening as he stared into the darkness where the object had been. A quick scan revealed nothing. No vehicles, no guards, no helicopters or searchlights, just empty tarmac bathed in harsh buzzing lights and an unsettling stillness. Later, when I played back the video, everything was corrupted. The file was mostly static and glitchy, as if someone had deliberately scrambled it. Only a single frame remained, frozen for a split second. A faint silhouette stood where the object had been, not clear enough to identify, more like a sideways shadow, something out of focus. I studied that frame endlessly, trying to zoom in, brighten it, apply filters, but the image never clarified. It felt like the footage was telling me to forget what I thought I saw, or perhaps reminding me how little I truly understand. The next day, I kept my distance from the fence. Jasper wouldn't stop pacing, his ears twitching at every sound, tail stiff, sensing something I couldn't perceive. Around town, the festival continued, full of laughter and chatter, but out here, the desert seemed to have swallowed all noise. That night, I slept in the truck's cab, the radio humming with static and occasional military chatter. The thought of returning, of getting a better look, crossed my mind. Yet something held me back. I felt watched, not in a threatening way, but as if the desert and its inhabitants were simply waiting. I haven't shared this with many people. Most would dismiss it as crazy talk. But every time I look at that corrupted footage, that single blurred frame, I wonder how close I came to something never meant to be seen. And I can't help but wonder if it's still out there, waiting. At 11:45 p.m., just before the midnight lockdown, I clocked in a T-Perimeter Tower 3. The tower overlooked the Groom Lake scrub edge with a slim moon hanging in the sky. The night felt heavy, charged with an eerie stillness. My routine checks seemed normal. Fence lights glowing, motion sensors green, radio tuned to channel 4. Orion sat beside me in the cab, his ears alert and head swiveling like he sensed something unusual. When midnight struck, the base's exterior floodlights dimmed, standard protocol. But this time, the radio went completely silent. A brief static beep, then nothing. I tapped the handset, twisted the volume, but no communications came through. Typically, I'd hear chatter from the control shack or roving patrols, but tonight, an unnatural quiet had descended. Orion whined softly and thumped his tail. I switched my flashlight to high beam and scanned the fence line. Emptiness greeted me. "Base, this is Tower 3. Come in," I called out. Only the winds rattling against the chain link answered. Grabbing my sidearm and pocket knife, I clipped the radio mic to my vest and descended the tower ladder. Orion followed, pausing briefly on the gravel. Emergency fence lights glowed red, marking the perimeter, while the compound's floodlights remained dark. A distant generator's faint hum was the only sound. At the gate, the keypad showed no response. My keycard yielded nothing, still locked. I radioed the tower again, my voice echoing in the gloom. Orion paced, nose to the ground, then looked up at me, head tilted quizzically. Suddenly, warning sirens wailed briefly inside the base, then cut off abruptly. Gates across other towers slammed shut in rapid succession. Clank, clank, clank. I felt the ground vibrate beneath my boots. I decided to walk alongside the fence, Orion and my flashlight leading the way. My boots crunched on desert gravel, the torch's lens catching glints of razor wire. Orion's tail remained stiff, his eyes constantly scanning the darkness beyond the fence. After 10 minutes of walking, shapes emerged. Initially, I mistook them for rocks or crashed equipment, but something felt wrong. 10 yards outside the fence, a row of tall white figures stood motionless. They were utterly featureless. No clothing folds, no faces, no recognizable limbs. Just smooth white silhouettes, like mannequins carved from pure light. My heart raced. The night shift had been quiet till the moment I saw them. Lined up perfectly along the fence, they stood motionless while my flashlight beam washed over their bodies. Instead of casting shadows, the light seemed to wrap around them, as if they were absorbing and glowing from within. Orion growled low, his hackles raised, then barked once. I knelt to comfort him, but his tension was palpable. Standing again, I backed toward the gate, keeping my light trained on the figures. My radio crackled with static, no matter which channel I tried. "Hey, who's there?" I called out, hearing only my own echo mocking me. A cold breeze spun around, rattling the fence. The metallic smell of rust and old batteries hung in the air. As I reached for the gate latch, the figures began to flicker. Once, twice, 3 times. They wavered like heat waves over asphalt, then dissolved completely into the desert haze, leaving nothing but the fence and Orion's heavy panting. Frozen in place, I watched my flashlight beam cut through empty nothingness. The wind died. No sirens, no sounds. My radio remained dead. I clicked off the torch, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. Orion nudged my leg with a soft whine. Back in the tower cabin, I slammed and locked the door. Orion jumped onto the seat, eyes wide. The floodlights around the compound clicked on slowly, deliberately, and the generators hummed back to life. I checked the radios again. No communications anywhere. My cell phone showed no signal, with a low battery warning vibrating in my hand. The est of the night passed in fitful dozes. Phantom footsteps crunched on gravel outside. Orion barked once. Dust twisters kicked up by the wind danced across the landscape. My radio spat static whenever I touched it. At 5:45 a.m., everything changed. The comm center's text arrived. Lockdown lifted. Resume normal operation. Floodlights dimmed to standard brightness. Gates unlocked with a distant thud. Voices crackled back over the radio, half awake and routine. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Orion jumped down and stretched. Climbing down the tower ladder, with the wind shaking the rails, I watched the desert sun begin to burn off the night's strange memories. I was in the command center for the quarterly systems integration test. The base was quiet, with just me, my buddy Raj on comms, and our dog Shadow curled up under my desk. It was around 9:15 p.m., and normally during a systems run, you'd see screens flickering as data streams in, graphs spiking and then settling. But at exactly 9:18, everything on the main monitors changed. 1 second, we had schematics and performance logs. The next, rows of jagged symbols appeared. They weren't letters or numbers, but more like rune shapes stitched together, shifting slowly across the screen. I rubbed my eyes and leaned forward. Shadow stirred, giving a single low whine. Raj muttered through the headset, "You seeing this, Carlos?" I hit the keyboard to pull up our backup feed. Same symbols. Then came the melody. It started soft behind the screens, barely audible. Shadow's ears perked up, and Raj went silent. Later that day, I drove home on Route 375 beneath a bright blue sky. Orion rode shotgun, head out the window, tongue lolling. At Rachel, I stopped for coffee and asked the clerk about the lockdown. He shrugged. "We just saw the lights go out," he said. "Never heard sirens." Back at the security office, my supervisor asked where I'd been. I said I was on patrol. He nodded, eyes tired, and handed me the daily log. "Nothing reported," he said. "No fence breaches, no sensor triggers." He tapped his pen on my report. Lockdown was a precaution. Radio went out face-wide. I glanced at the hours log for Tower 3. Radio malfunction. Sensor reset. All marked operator error. No mention of figures. No mention of a strange chill. Earlier, on the gravel below, I found no footprints, no tire tracks. Nothing to show where the figures had been. Even the dust was disturbed only by my own prints. I looked at the fence, searching for a sign. Scratch marks, footprints, any evidence, but there was none. At home, I sat on the porch with Orion at my feet. The wind rustled scrub brush on the hill beyond our fence. I sipped coffee, staring at the ridge where I'd seen them. The sun warmed my neck, and my hands finally stopped shaking. I didn't file a service report. I left the logs as they were and went back to my usual routine. But every evening when I clock in for my shift, I find myself glancing toward those floodlights, wondering if the figures will step out of the darkness again. White, featureless, standing silently as the world goes on around them. The servers hummed with a static-laden music box rhythm, and my heart skipped a beat. Shadow lifted his head, ears perked, tilting sideways. An eerie, simple melody looped, ding, 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 dissolving into white noise. I reached for my headset mic. "Control, we have an anomaly." The basscom crackled back with silence. The melody swelled and vanished in an instant. Tapping restart on the console, the screens flickered black before returning to our standard interface of logs, graphs, and data streams. Raj swore. "What was that?" I checked the clock. 9:19 p.m. Something felt off about our time. The system uptime log revealed the network had gone dark for precisely 47 seconds, with no recorded downtime. Server room cameras blink, out completely. Security feeds showed only darkness, then lights returning. Attempting to pull logs, we discovered something strange. 47 seconds of missing data, followed by a single cryptic line. 4. Melody not found. Raj's voice dropped low. "Who programs an error message like that?" Shadow grew restless, prowling under the desk and sniffing cables as if expecting to find something. Reports began trickling in. Hangar B's lights dimmed, HVAC systems briefly vented cold air, and crew members reported an odd ringing in their ears, like an internal tuning fork. I stretched and walked to the window overlooking Groom Lake. The dry lake bed stretched dark and empty, distant hangar silhouettes barely visible. An unnatural silence hung in the air. No generator hum, no patrol vehicle sounds. Checking the server room, I found the racks humming steadily. No alarms. The air carried the warm scent of circuit boards. Flipping lights on and off confirmed everything looked normal. Yet those network logs still showed the unexplained 47-second gap. That night, Shadow remained vigilant by the door. Soft tapping outside caught my attention, like footsteps on gravel. I rose, flashlight in hand, and threw open the door. Nothing. The corridor stood empty, lights unchanged. Returning to bed, I noticed the bedside clock had advanced 10 minutes. I thought I'd misread it, but then the melody returned. I clocked in at 11:45 p.m., just before the midnight lockdown. Perimeter Tower 3 was my station, positioned by the west fence overlooking the Groom Lake scrub edge. The moon hung like a slim sliver overhead. Something strange had been brewing for days. A bass-like melody had mysteriously echoed through the server room, and while people joked about it, no one wanted to discuss the details. Official reports labeled it as power fluctuation or electromagnetic interference. Raj and I felt an unsettling sensation whenever we passed that server room door, and late at night, I could swear I heard the melody through my phone speaker. By Friday, maintenance had shut down the network to scrub systems. We worked by lantern light in the communications bay, reloading software and reconfiguring routers. Shadow, my dog, lay near the power supply, his ears twitching at each beep. No unusual symbols appeared, and the logs filled the gaps with interpolated data, creating smooth graphs without sudden dips. That evening, under a half moon, I took Shadow for a walk along the fence. The desert wind was warm, and tire tracks from earlier test rigs were still visible in the ground beneath the barbed wire. I knelt to inspect some scuff marks in the dirt, finding nothing unusual. As we turned to head home, my radio crackled softly. A static beep, then the melody's opening note. Ding! My pulse raced. I hit the power button, but the radio died. Suddenly, my phone glowed to life, displaying an error screen. Melody not found, it seemed to whisper. I dropped both devices, shouting to Shadow. The sound cut off, and the desert went silent. Inside the quarters, lights flickered as I crossed the threshold. My phone lay on the table, locked and blank. Facing the wall, I was convinced I could still hear the faintest chime. Later, I discovered the official incident report, archived under Network Anomaly. No mention of music, symbols, or missing time, just a cryptic footnote. System restored 0312, 0 to 20 hours. Cause undetermined. That night, I took my dog home and left my phone in the car. As I lay in bed, Shadow curled beside me, his ears twitching. In the darkness, I listened intently for the bass's hum, the servers that whisper, or the faint echo of those haunting notes slipping through the walls. The desert air hung heavy, charged with an electric stillness. My routine checks felt different tonight. Fence lights glowed, motion sensors green. Radio tuned to Channel 4. Orion sat beside me in the cab, his ears twitching with an unspoken tension. Something wasn't right. When midnight struck, the base's floodlights dimmed as usual. But this time, the radio went silent. Static crackled briefly, then complete radio silence. I tapped the handset, twisted the volume dial. No communication. The usual background chatter from the control shack and patrol teams was gone. Orion whined softly, thumping his tail once. I clicked my flashlight to high beam and swept it across the fence line. Nothing moved. Base, this is Tower 3. Come in, I called out. Only wind answered, rattling the chain link fence. I grabbed my sidearm and pocket knife, clipped the radio mic to my vest, and descended the tower ladder. Orion followed, pausing on the gravel. Emergency red lights marked the perimeter, but the compound remained dark. A distant generator hummed in the background. At the gate, the keypad was unresponsive. My keycard failed to unlock it. I tried radioing again, my voice echoing in the empty darkness. Orion paced, nose to the ground, then looked up at me with a tilted head. Suddenly, warning sirens wailed briefly before cutting off abruptly. Gates across other towers slammed shut in quick succession. Clank, clank, clank. I felt the ground vibrate beneath my boots. Deciding to investigate, I walked alongside the fence. Orion led the way, my flashlight catching glints of razor wire overhead. His tail remained stiff, constantly glancing beyond the fence line. After 10 minutes, shapes emerged in the darkness. At first, they seemed like rocks or crashed equipment, but something was off. 10 yards outside the fence, a row of tall, white figures stood motionless. Featureless and smooth, they were like mannequins carved from pure light. No clothing, no faces, no recognizable limbs. My heart raced. Orion's low growl broke the silence as I swept my flashlight across the figures standing in a perfect line by the fence. They seemed to absorb the light, glowing from within, motionless and unblinking. The metallic scent of rust and old batteries hung in the air. I backed toward the gate, keeping the beam trained on them. My radio crackled with static, no matter which channel I tried. "Hey, who's there?" Only my echo answered. A cold breeze spun around, rattling the fence. The figures flickered, once, twice, 3 times, wavering like heat mirages before dissolving into the desert haze. Only the fence remained, along with Orion's heavy panting. I stood frozen, my flashlight cutting through the empty space. Inside the tower cabin, I slammed and locked the door. Orion jumped onto the seat, eyes wide. I checked the radios again, no communications anywhere. Suddenly, the floodlights clicked on slowly, deliberately, and the generators hummed back to life. My cell phone showed no signal, just a low battery warning. Beyond the fence, the desert stretched empty and silent. The rest of the night passed in fitful dozes. Phantom footsteps crunched on gravel outside. Orion barked once. I'd scramble for my flashlight, finding nothing. Dust twisters danced in the wind. My radio spat static intermittently. At 5:45 a.m., a text from the comm center broke the tension. Lockdown lifted. Normal operations resumed. Floodlights dimmed. Gates unlocked with a distant thud. Voices crackled to life on the radio, half awake. I exhaled, releasing tension I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Orion stretched and jumped down. Climbing the tower ladder, I felt the wind shake the rails. The desert sun began burning away the night's gloom. On the gravel below, something waited. I was 20 minutes into my night crosswind pattern when the first glitch happened. The gauges on my panel flickered. Altimeter, heading indicator. Even the fuel flow meter went dark for a split second before snapping back like nothing happened. I was practicing touch and goes at the small strip outside Rachel, Nevada. The runway lights just a pale glow behind me. No storm in the area, the moon hidden behind a thin haze. I shrugged it off as a bad circuit, tensed my grip on the yoke and lined up for another landing. By the third circuit, I noticed it, a shadow moving across the stars just above the northern horizon. At first, I thought a cloud had drifted by, but the sky was clear. I banked left, trying to catch it out the side window. The shadow shifted too, sliding silently between constellations. Just a perfect black shape like someone cut a piece out of the night. I leveled off it. Back at the security office, my supervisor asked where I'd been. I said I was on patrol. He nodded, eyes tired, and handed me the daily log. Nothing reported, he said. We show no fence breaches, no sensor triggers. He tapped his pen on my report. Lockdown was precaution. Wired glitch. Radio went out base-wide. I glanced at the hours log for Tower 3. Radio malfunction. Sensor reset. All marked. Operator error. No mention of figures. No mention of a strange chill. I looked at the fence, searching for a sign. Scratch marks, footprints, any evidence, but there was none. No footprints, no tire tracks. Take nothing to show where the figures had been. Even the dust was disturbed only by my own prints. That day, I drove home on Route 375 beneath the bright blue sky. Orion rode shotgun, head out the window, tongue hanging. At the town of Rachel, I stopped for coffee and asked the clerk about the lockdown. He shrugged. We just saw the lights go out, he said. Never heard sirens. At home, I sat on the porch with Orion at my feet. The wind rustled scrub brush on the hill beyond our fence. I sipped coffee, staring at the ridge where I'd seen them. The sun warmed my neck and my hands finally stopped shaking. I didn't file a service report. I left the logs as they were and went back to my usual routine. But every evening when I clock in for my shift, I find myself glancing toward those floodlights, wondering if the figures will step out of the darkness again, white, featureless, standing silently as the world goes on around them. At 3,000 feet, everything went quiet. The cockpit fell silent, no radio traffic, no engine drone, just air hissing over the wings. A diamond-shaped shadow hovered, its edges razor-sharp and surface completely matte, backlit by starlight that blotted out every pinprick behind it. My heart raced as I reached for the infrared scanner. The screen remained pitch black. No heat signature. I cycled through switches, watching instruments go dark in succession, as if someone were methodically flipping them off. The transponder and comms died. I cut the engine to idle and drifted, watching the diamond slip upward, then tilt on its point and glide east. I tried to follow, releasing the yoke and grabbing the throttles, but the tachometer spat static. The Lycoming's familiar hum vanished. No thrust, no prop noise, just silence. Sweat beaded on my palms as I opened the throttle, desperately hoping the engine would catch. Instead, every instrument blinked off again. Suspended in a feeling of falling, I realized the runway lights had disappeared. Rachel's glow receded below, a dim smear on the desert floor. Taking a deep breath, I turned off automatic systems and relied on raw instinct. Pushing the yoke forward to drop altitude, I watched the wingtip against the starfield. After what seemed like an eternity, the engine roared back to life. Gauges snapped on, radio crackled, and the diamond vanished. I circled twice, scanning the sky, but only jet contrails in the Milky Way remained. Routine radio chatter from a Cessna on approach filled the air. Checking my heading, I discovered I'd drifted far east over barren scrub and dust roads. No restricted area lights or patrol vehicles were visible. On the ground, I taxied back to the tie-down and killed the engine. My legs felt oddly heavy as I climbed out, my headset crackling with static. The desert behind me remained as silent and empty as ever. Descending the boarding steps, I stood on the tarmac, gazing at the black sky. Strip-edge lights blinked, but no runway signals pointed toward that strange horizon. Locking up the plane, I started walking toward the hangar. A barely perceptible wind whispered around me, but a low thrum resonated under my boots, like distant bass, or perhaps just my racing heartbeat echoing. Glancing over my shoulder, I saw nothing move. My shadow stretched long across the empty landscape. The empty highway stretched before me, headlights cutting through desert darkness. My phone buzzed with a simple weather alert about wind speed, no electromagnetic interference. Back at the hangar, mechanics had just finished a late repair. When I asked about power grid anomalies, they shrugged. No logged outages. The circuit breaker panel looked clean, lights steady. I pulled into my yard and killed the engine, listening to crickets. Through the windshield, only stars filled the open sky. No diamond, no shadow. Inside, Mara waited with Milo, our border collie pit mix. He bounded to the door, muddy paws skidding across tile, tail wagging. Something felt off. He looked at me, ears tilted, but didn't bark. Mara handed me water. I sipped, tasting dust and adrenaline, tracing the glass rim with my thumb. Wind rattled the window panes like a soft drum. Later, I checked the flight nav logs on my laptop. Every detail was there: altitude, heading, throttle, except a 5-second data freeze that matched exactly when I saw the diamond. I pulled logs into a spreadsheet. No anomalies, no extra signals, radar pings, or transponder codes. It was like my instruments momentarily died, and no one else noticed. That night, dreams of flying returned. Instruments dead, chasing a shape through stars. I woke before dawn, Milo's nose nudging my hand. For 2 days, I avoided flying. Instead, I buried myself in paperwork, ordered parts, checked oil samples, anything routine to feel normal. Yet every time I glanced out the office window, a perfect black diamond seemed to slip between stars. Soon I'll log my next flight. Pre-flight checks, switches flipped, engine warming. Mara will wave goodbye. Milo will race alongside the wheels as I climb into the cockpit. And I'll wonder, will my gauges stay alive? Will I catch that thing again, drifting smoothly through the night, blocking everything I thought I knew? The desert was silent near Rachel, Nevada, save for the tumbleweed rattling against the fence and Orion's soft snuffling beside me. Midnight had just passed, and I'd been taking long exposure shots of the Milky Way to pass the time. When I glanced at the camera's small LCD screen, something caught my eye. A faint, dimly glowing sphere hovered above the northern mesa. Initially, I dismissed it as a hot pixel or lens flare, not uncommon when the shutter stays open for 30 seconds. But zooming in revealed a soft, pale green circle with fuzzy edges. Checking the previous shots, I noticed the orb appeared in nearly the same spot across different star cluster frames. My dog's behavior was unusual. Orion sat up, ears twitching, and let out a low growl, something he'd never done before. I scanned the sky where the orb had been, but saw only stars. When I petted him, he whined and nudged my hand. Grabbing my phone, I attached the telescope lens adapter and started recording video. About 2 minutes in, a green light flickered through the eyepiece where the mesa rim met the sky. It lingered briefly before vanishing. Checking my watch, I noticed my pulse LED blinking at 72 BPM, exactly matching the sphere's pulse. My chest tightened. Orion suddenly jumped up and ran toward the fence, tail down. I followed, wet his gaze but saw nothing. Cold air brushed my arms, and I pulled my jacket closer. The wind picked up as I stopped the recording and packed my gear. Walking back to the house, Orion paused at the driveway's top, sniffing the air. A low, transformer-like hum hung in the background. Beyond the last streetlight, the road stretched pitch black. My flashlight beam cut through dust motes, revealing only desert brush and my own shadow. Later, reviewing the laptop footage, I watched the stars streak with Earth's rotation. At 12:09, the sphere flickered into view, its light pulsing in perfect sync with my heart's LED blink. The night was quiet, save for a persistent hum that seemed to vibrate through the ground. My phone buzzed with a storm alert for the mountains north of town, but nothing stirred locally. Orion lay on the rug, legs twitching in a dream-chased reverie. Sleep eluded me. At 3 a.m., the vibration intensified, as if the foundation itself was trembling. Pulling on my boots, I slipped outside. The sky had turned overcast, the Milky Way obscured. Above the mesa, a sickly green glow pulsed through the clouds. With Orion close and tense, I crept down the driveway. The hum deepened, becoming more resonant. At the yard gate, I watched the glow fade and flare, retreating and returning. A prickle ran down my neck, like an unseen presence watching from the ridge. "Who's there?" I called, my voice thin. Orion growled, and we hurried back inside. Morning revealed something strange in the camera logs. Between 12:07 and 10:02 a.m., a sphere had appeared 6 times, each sighting precisely 5 minutes apart. Remarkably, its light pulsed in perfect sync with my heartbeat, which remained steady between 70 and 75 BPM. The storm alert never materialized. Seeking a better view, I drove to the old radio tower. Orion rode beside me, nose pressed against the window, the rough road cut with deep washes. At the tower, an empty shed provided a flat platform for my equipment. As twilight approached, the wind grew stronger than predicted, metal rattling around us. Orion paced nervously. I watched the mesa, remembering the 12:07 timing. Right on schedule, the shutter clicked. In the eyepiece, a muted green orb flickered to life, trembling at its edges. I panned across the ridgeline. Nothing moved, no planes, no tower lights, just the sphere, breathing in rhythm with my chest. When I reached to steady the tripod, it slipped. The camera jerked, capturing only darkness. Refocusing, I found the orb had vanished. Moments later, Orion barked twice, sharp and distant. Looking up, I saw a shape crouching at the tower's base. I rounded the bend in Mockingbird Canyon just after sunset, the old Kenworth W900's dash flickering. No fancy electronics, but the speedo and tack dropped out for a heartbeat before returning. Reddish canyon walls glowed in the last daylight, and I shrugged. Heat mirages do weird things to metal. Running supply shifts out of Indian Springs for months, I'd seen plenty of strange roadside illusions. The route hugged the desert floor, just under the restricted airspace near Groom Lake. Old-fashioned paper maps sat in the dash. I didn't need glitchy electronics to guide me. Slowing to 25, I eased off the gas, but every gauge fluttered again. Even the clock ticked backward for a second. Later that night, I found myself staring at a dark, slender ladder. My flashlight beam swept across, but the figure retreated before I could catch it. Orion whined, backpedaling until I pulled him close. No time to hesitate. Wind whipped as I packed my gear, heart pounding so loud I feared the neighbors might hear. During the drive home, I constantly checked the rearview mirror, watching cliffs illuminated by headlights until they vanished behind hills. Back home, I sat in darkness, laptop open. Tower files revealed the sphere only in the forward, first shot of the sequence. No subsequent flicker. I stretched the videos. Nothing. Orion slept at my feet while I stared at the wall clock. 1:16 a.m. 30 seconds later, a cold gust rattled the window panes. My pulse spiked to 90 BPM. Hand pressed to my chest. No light. I drifted off, dreaming of an orb flickering inside me, pulses echoing across the desert. The hum woke me, full and low. The house seemed to lean with the vibration. At the window, no glow above the mesa. Just wind-tossed scrub and a sky turning gray with dawn. Coffee in hand, I watched Orion sniff the air, tail low. That night, I considered more photos, but each time I looked at the camera, memories of the tower's shape and pulsing light stopped me. Reviewing the footage frame by frame, heartbeat by heartbeat, I realized how little I truly saw. I left the camera on the dining table, lens cap on, and headed to bed. Orion followed, nosing my shoe. Outside, the desert sighed under the wind. Somewhere up there, the sphere continued, calm, distant, keeping its own rhythm. The night was still, the desert quiet around me. I was camped under a sky blazing with stars, the Milky Way bright overhead. Scout, my lean black lab mix, rested his head on my boot while I cooked beans over the portable stove. Wind had died down completely. An odd hum caught my attention, deep and steady, not like my engine or a road grader. I snapped the stove shut and scanned the darkness. Echoes of canyon wind rattled in my ears. My flashlight swept across the scrub, revealing nothing. Scout licked his snout. "Probably nothing, bud," I told him, but neither of us looked away from the ridgeline. Earlier that day, deep in the canyon, my truck had gone strange. The engine died completely, radio cut off, cab lights dimmed. I turned the key. Nothing. Checking under the hood revealed everything looked normal. Generator fine, alternator belt with proper tension. By the time I returned to the cab, everything mysteriously roared back to life. Lights on, radio playing an old blues track with a weird, wobbling rhythm. Around midnight, I crawled into the sleeper, half listening to Scout's soft snores and the fridge's faint hum. My dreams twisted, rock faces shifting, gauges spinning, that deep hum pulsing with my heartbeat. Scout's whine woke me. The cab was cold, ice crystals forming on the dash. Winter had arrived early. Moonlight cast pale shadows across the rest stop lot. The heater gauge flickered wildly. When I reached to touch it, My hand passed through a ripple in the glass like a pond's surface. Scout padded to the window, muzzle pressed against the glass, tail wagging slowly. Beyond the ridge, under starlight, I saw it, a shape too straight and flat to be natural. Dark and angular, silent at the canyon's edge. Broad at the base, rising maybe 20 feet, tapering slightly. No lights, but edges so crisp they seemed to slice the starlight. I blinked. The shape remained. Scout whined and backed away. Grabbing my coat and flashlight, I unlatched the door. The air hit me like a freezer's breath, cold and electric. My torch beam died halfway up the canyon wall, swallowed by darkness. No reflection, no shadow. I switched it off. The shape vanished. The canyon rim looked ordinary as morning sunlight painted the rock orange. I drove that stretch again, checking if the gauges would glitch like before. They didn't. No deep cold, no mysterious hum. I resisted the urge to search for a dark shape. Back home, I reviewed the dash camera. The unit recorded normally, but timestamps jumped backward for a few seconds around midnight, then forward again. The footage showed an empty canyon wall, just lens glare, shifting wind, and me leaning toward the screen. Scout watched me, tail wagging, as sunlight streamed through the blinds. I scratched my head and told him maybe it was all in my head. He licked my hand, eyes half closed. It started the night before. My heart was pounding. Wind kicked up, rattling trailer doors nearby. Scout's eyes were wide, nudging my leg. I yanked the cab door shut, locking us inside. Gauges calmed. The heater hummed. Radio spit static when I pressed the tuner. No station. By dawn, frost had melted and the sky turned pale gray. I walked Scout around the lot. No disturbance, no footprints in the dust beyond the pavement. The canyon rim looked like any other desert rock. I climbed back into the cab and punched my route to Indian Springs. Everything worked perfectly. Gauge needles steady, radio tuned clear to traffic. Scout curled up on the bunk as I eased the truck into gear. During the drive back, I watched canyon lights fade in my mirror. Fuel economy dropped, engine idling rough as I passed the rim. Rolling down the window, I heard it again. A low, insistent hum pressed against the glass like a living thing. My heart thudded. I glanced up. The sky was empty. At the depot, Scout hopped down. I locked up. My dispatcher asked if everything was okay. I said yes, no problems. My voice sounded tired, too loud in the quiet office. That night, the living room was warm, the bed inviting. Scout circled twice, sank into his blanket. I dropped keys on the table, checked my phone. No messages. I sat on the couch, stared at the dark window. Now, at night, I find myself watching the window, waiting for frost on the sill, listening for that hum under the road. But the house stays silent. The desert remains still beyond the walls. Still, every time I start the rig, I glance around. I ran a small garage on the outskirts of Rachel, Nevada, for nearly 2 decades. It was a tiny spot barely visible on the map, right near Area 51. Most of my customers were local folks or occasional travelers passing through. But some jobs were different, strange in ways that made me question everything I thought I knew. The vehicles that came through were unlike anything I'd seen before. Engines would die completely, with no warning or sputtering, just sudden, complete silence. Some drivers claimed they'd seen weird lights in the sky just before their vehicles stopped. I used to dismiss these stories as wild imagination, but the evidence was undeniable. Cars, trucks, even ATVs would arrive with panels twisted in impossible ways. The metal looked like it had been softened and stretched by some massive, invisible force. No dents, no scratches, just this unnatural rippling that defied explanation. I checked the gauges when vehicles passed through Mockingbird Canyon, half expecting the needles to tremble. One summer night around 10 p.m., everything changed. The wind was fierce, making the desert feel unexpectedly cold. While locking up the garage, I spotted something extraordinary on the highway beyond the ridge. A bright, rectangular shape hung motionless about 50 feet above the ground, completely still despite the powerful gusts. This wasn't like any aircraft I'd ever seen. No wings, no blinking lights, just a glowing rectangle that seemed too precise to be a natural phenomenon. I watched, wondering if my eyes were deceiving me. The wind howled, rattling loose signs and creating an eerie atmosphere. Curiosity got the better of me. I climbed into my pickup and slowly rolled closer, windows down, listening to the wind whip past. The light remained perfectly stationary. When I pulled over to get a better look, it vanished instantly. No sound, no flash, just gone. Those unexplained incidents stayed with me, a constant reminder that some mysteries defy simple explanation. I grew up in Rachel, Nevada. Yeah, that little dot on the map that everyone associates with Area 51. I never thought much about the whole alien stuff until it started happening right outside our back door. I lived there with my wife Jenny, our kid Sam, and our dog Nellie, a German Shepherd mix, who was usually calm but had this sixth sense about things. It was late spring, just after sunset. The desert was cool for once, the wind barely stirring the sagebrush. We were sitting on the porch when Nellie suddenly stiffened. She wasn't barking or whining, just frozen, staring up at the sky. At first, I thought she was watching a plane or a helicopter, but there was nothing obvious. Above the hills behind our house, where the desert just stretched out toward Groom Lake, a tight cluster of stars seemed to pulse. It wasn't like blinking or twinkling like stars normally do. It was more like a slow, rhythmic brightening and dimming, almost as if the whole group was breathing. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was some weird after image or my tired brain playing tricks. Jenny noticed it too. "That's not normal," she said, squinting. Sam just sat quietly, his face turned upward. Nellie's hackles raised. She growled low, a deep rumble that didn't sound like any dog I'd heard before. Usually she was protective but friendly. This was different. She kept growling. Later, while driving my truck through the dark desert, I encountered something strange. The whole thing lasted maybe 30 seconds. I checked my truck's gauges, and everything was normal. No glitches or interference. I sat there unsure if I dreamed the whole thing or if it was real. My dog Roscoe was in the cab with me, and he kept staring out the window, ears perked, growling softly at the empty highway. After that night, I kept thinking about those cars with the weird warping and dead engines. I started wondering if whatever that light was, it might have something to do with those strange breakdowns. None of the customers ever reported anything like that light or craft, just the car dying out of nowhere. I didn't tell anyone about what I saw. It felt like one of those things you keep to yourself, because people would either laugh or start asking questions you don't want to answer. I still live out here working on cars and trucks, fixing what comes my way. But sometimes when the wind picks up and the night gets quiet, I find myself glancing toward the highway, wondering if I'll see that glowing rectangle again. The stars that night behaved unlike anything I'd ever witnessed before. While pacing on the porch with my ears pinned back, I tried convincing Jenny it was just an optical illusion. But the celestial movement was undeniable, slowly shifting, clustering, and spreading in patterns totally foreign to me. Sleep became elusive. Nellie remained restless, pacing at the bed's edge and attuned to sounds beyond human perception. Each subsequent night grew more intense. The star cluster pulsed brighter each evening, and Nellie's behavior grew increasingly unpredictable. Sharp, sudden barks would punctuate the silence, followed by long, unnerving moments of absolute stillness. Sam suggested aliens, but we dismissed his theory, not wanting to alarm him. About a week later, everything changed. Around 11:30 p.m., while getting water in the kitchen, I noticed an unusual glow through the window overlooking the hills. Jenny and Sam slept soundly upstairs. Nellie sat rigidly by the back door, ears alert and tail stiff. The glow intensified, a pale blue light unlike any I'd seen before. Steady and low, it hovered just above the ridge, casting an ethereal illumination across the rocky desert landscape. Stepping outside, I detected a strange vibration. Not quite a sound, but a pressure that seemed to penetrate my bones, making my skin tingle and teeth feel oddly gritty. Nellie's violent barking shattered the night's silence, awakening Jenny and Sam. They joined me on the porch, watching in stunned silence. The light pulsed gently, mirroring the earlier star cluster's rhythm. Suddenly, a dark, smooth silhouette emerged beyond the ridge, too large to be dived any known desert creature or vehicle. Without warning, the shapeless form lifted silently, that low hum growing more pronounced. Nellie snarled and snapped frantically as we struggled to restrain her. The craft rose slowly, defying every expectation of movement or sound. That week, the pulsing cluster vanished. The strange low hum didn't come back. Nellie calmed down a little, but she still watched the hills as if waiting. We told a few people in town, mostly the locals, who had stories about strange lights around the base, but no one said anything new. I keep thinking about that night. The way the light moved, the smell in the air, and Nellie's reaction. I'm sure of one thing. Whatever it wasn't something normal, and it wasn't here to visit, but it never came close enough to really see. And maybe that's why I'm still here telling you this. I worked as a night janitor for a private contractor just outside of Area 51. Not officially part of the base, but close enough that most of what happened around there bled into my nights. My shift was from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., mostly cleaning offices, break rooms, and maintenance halls. I never talked about what I heard or saw, mostly because nobody would believe me, and also because I wasn't sure what I was hearing. The first time I noticed something weird was about a month into the job. I was on my break sitting by one of the big windows that looked out toward the restricted area. It was a clear night, cool but dry desert air, stars everywhere. The base itself was quiet, but there were always these weird flickering lights on the horizon, not like the usual security lights or vehicle headlights. They kind of blinked on and off in random patterns, sometimes faint, sometimes bright enough to cast strange shadows in my room. A light suddenly shot up. It hovered, then moved silently across the ridge and disappeared behind a thicker line of hills. After it left, the desert fell eerily silent. Jenny commented on a strange sharp scent, like ozone mixed with burnt rubber that lingered in the air. I stepped closer to where the glow had been and noticed patches of scorched earth. The soil cracked and dry as if something had baked it from underneath. We stayed outside for a long time after that, just listening. Nellie refused to calm down. She paced the yard for hours, staring at the hills, growling low, refusing to settle. The next morning, I went out with a flashlight and examined the scorched patch. It wasn't large, maybe 8 or 10 feet across, but it looked like something heavy had pressed against the earth and left a burn mark. No footprints or tire tracks nearby. One night, while working the late shift, I discovered an old radio scanner tucked away in the janitor's closet. It wasn't sophisticated equipment, just something that could pick up local frequencies. I started listening to routine chatter from maintenance teams and security patrols, hoping to pass the time. But then something strange began happening. Whispers would drift through the static, unlike any language I'd ever heard. They weren't just quiet conversations, but low, almost deliberate murmurs that felt alien. When I tried recording these sounds on my phone, the files would mysteriously glitch or corrupt. The voices came in bursts, fading in and out unpredictably. No matter how I adjusted the dial, they would vanish. I tried convincing myself it was interference or some local prank, but something felt different. These weren't random noises, they seemed intentional. At irregular intervals, the whispers continued. Sometimes, if I tuned carefully, I could almost distinguish a few words, though they remained incomprehensible. And the strange occurrences weren't limited to audio. I started noticing odd movements outside. Footsteps would approach, not like the regular patrol routes, but soft and deliberate. I'd look out, and nothing would be there. Just empty desert and distant fence lines. Then the lights started appearing. Small, faint glows moving along the perimeter, floating just above the ground. They'd disappear the moment I tried to focus on them. Shadows began catching my attention. Not human or animal shapes, but undefined forms near the fence. Once, I thought I saw something crouching near a fence post, but it dissolved into the darkness when I blinked. The whole experience wasn't terrifying, but deeply unsettling, like something was watching me, and I was watching back. One night, the whispers changed. They became almost rhythmic, like a chant. I remember gripping the radio, sweating, desperately trying to understand what I was hearing. The voices never increased in volume, but their intensity grew. I worked at Area 51 for about 5 years as a tech. My job wasn't glamorous, just basic maintenance on older underground systems. I never had high-level clearance or access to special projects. But even the routine work was strange enough to make you wonder what was really happening. Most nights, I was alone in maintenance tunnels or massive control rooms where the walls seemed to pulse with an unsettling energy. The voices started softly at first, barely noticeable. They were just a distant, haunting murmur that always faded before I could focus on them. Another time, my dog Tilly started acting strange. She growled at the window, staring intently at the fence line, something she'd never done before. Her fur bristled as she backed away slowly, and she wouldn't stop growling even when I tried to calm her. A light near the fence flickered, faint but definite. After that, I became paranoid. I started locking doors, double-checking windows, and keeping blinds drawn. It felt like something out there wanted me to see it, but not too closely. Once, I caught a reflection in the glass, something behind me when I was completely alone. I spun around. Nothing was there. I thought about quitting, but I needed the money. The shifts were quiet, except for unexplained noises. One night, the voices grew louder, almost as if they were right beside me. The scanner crackled and cut out completely. When I went to check the breaker box in the hall, the air turned ice cold. I swear I saw a thin shadow slip past the far door frame. I closed the panel quickly and left the building. Outside, the desert was calm. Tilly paced nervously. That night, the fence lights went dark for about 5 minutes with no security announcements. When power returned, the lights flickered strangely before going back to normal. I finally handed in my resignation. Before leaving, I packed up the radio scanner and salvaged what recordings I could. Most files were corrupted or blank, with only a few fragments of whispering remaining. Now I'm home, miles away from that desert and those shadows. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear faint murmurs like static on an empty radio frequency. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, Tilly stares out the window, her ears twitching as if waiting for something to return. The desert compound had a constant, low-level hum that seemed to vibrate through the entire place. It wasn't a sound you could easily identify. No distinct motor or fan, just a steady vibration that resonated deep in your bones. I'd brought my dog Hobo with me, a scrappy mutt I'd smuggled in. He always hated these tunnels, his fur bristling and whining like he sensed something wasn't right. This particular night was different. I just finished checking a server bank in the West Wing, with only emergency red lights illuminating the pitch-dark space. As I was heading back, the humming suddenly changed. It became more intense, almost like a beckoning call. Hobo stopped cold, staring down a corridor I'd never noticed before. An old, normally sealed, restricted section now had its door slightly ajar, with a faint blue glow seeping out. Curiosity pulled me forward, but Hobo growled and tugged at his leash. My gut warned me to turn back. The humming shifted again, now deeper, almost musical, vibrating through the air in a way I'd never experienced. The blue light flickered and vanished, leaving only darkness. When I tried the door, it was locked. My phone's screen went black. Suddenly, Hobo bolted, dragging me back through the tunnels. His barking echoed until we burst into the main hallway, where the mysterious hum faded to silence. I reported the strange light to my supervisor, who dismissed it as old wiring or a maintenance mistake. But something felt fundamentally wrong. The next morning, I went to check the security camera footage, knowing what I'd seen wasn't ordinary. The entire experience was surreal, a blend of unexplained sound, mysterious light, and my dog's intense reaction. Something was definitely not right in that hidden corridor. I knew the system well enough to pull up some older recordings from a restricted wing I wasn't supposed to access. At first, everything looked normal. Dark hallways, empty rooms, blinking consoles. But around 3:13 a.m., something caught my eye. The camera outside the restricted door showed a strange phenomenon. A faint shimmer appeared in the air, like heat waves rising from asphalt. It grew stronger, slowly taking shape. A craft, or something craft-like, emerged. No lights, no markings, just a smooth, dark object hovering silently a few feet off the ground. Its form was incredibly unstable, one moment oval, the next angular, edges blurred and reformed like smoke dancing in a breeze. Most unsettling was the complete silence. No hum, no drone, just absolute stillness. After 4 minutes, it dissolved as if it had never existed. I quietly showed the footage to a few coworkers, but nobody wanted to discuss it openly. Management claimed it was a new prototype drone or security system test. Yet they couldn't explain the shimmer or its bizarre disappearance. A week later, the humming returned, louder this time. It vibrated through the walls, threatening to shake the entire building. That night, the cameras captured the shimmering shape again. This time, it seemed to be looking directly at the cameras, or perhaps beyond them. My attempts to report the incident were quickly shut down. Superiors dismissed it as classified experimental technology, something I wasn't cleared to understand. They told me to forget about it and focus on maintenance. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something alive was down there, watching and waiting. Hobo, my dog, would sit quietly at tunnel entrances, staring into darkness as if sensing something just beyond the light. I found myself doing the same, feeling watched. I left the base a year ago, not fired, just exhausted by the silence and secrets. Yet the humming still haunts my dreams. Sometimes when I look up at the Nevada night sky, I see that same shimmering shape drifting beyond the stars. No one talks about what's really down there, but I know it's not just machines. The place was far from the Hollywood image of flying saucers and alien autopsies. Instead, it was a world of hyper-advanced military technology that seemed more like science fiction, except it was real. My job as a project engineer at Area 51 for 3 years involved helping with reverse engineering of objects that were strictly off-limits to outsiders. What made the technology truly strange wasn't just its appearance, but how it defied our understanding of physics. We would conduct controlled experiments with vehicles that appeared capable of phasing through solid objects. Our testing process involved placing prototypes into sealed metal chambers with thick walls designed to contain and test these extraordinary machines. During these tests, we'd observe through reinforced glass or cameras. Sometimes the vehicle would simply vanish from one spot and reappear on the other side of the chamber, as if it had passed through the wall without any noise or vibration. Not every test was successful, but the ones that were left us unsettled. On several occasions, the vehicle would disappear completely, only to reappear in another testing bay hundreds of meters away, showing no signs of damage. These moments created an undeniable tension in the room. It felt like we were investigating something beyond our comprehension, something we perhaps shouldn't be exploring. The aftermath of these tests was equally unnerving. People would experience strange physical symptoms, muscle strains, headaches, moments of dizziness or confusion. I remember Lyle, a mechanic, collapsing during a shift, claiming his body felt like it was vibrating internally. The team would quickly shut down cameras and erase most of the footage, ensuring these unexplained events remained hidden. Whatever was happening, it had been there longer than any of us, and I'm certain it never stopped watching. The chamber was a place of mystery and tension. After an incident that left someone looking like they'd been pulled apart and reassembled, access became strictly controlled. Top-level approval was required for anyone to get near it. What haunted me wasn't the technology or the physical trauma, but the cavalier attitude toward potential dangers. Scientists and engineers raised concerns, yet their warnings were systematically dismissed. Military experiments, they said, inherently involved risks. But something about this felt fundamentally wrong. Late one night, during a quiet shift, I was returning to my quarters when I noticed the chamber door slightly open. Juno, my dog who lived with me in staff housing, grew restless. A strange, precise shimmer hung near the doorframe, like heat waves, but cooler and more defined. It flickered briefly and vanished. Juno growled and refused to move closer. A soft thud came from inside the empty chamber. When security arrived, they found nothing unusual. The room was locked, undamaged, with no signs of entry. Cameras had mysteriously gone dark an hour earlier, and no one claimed responsibility. Strange occurrences became more frequent. Machines would flicker in and out of visibility. Unexplained noises echoed through labs. Electronic badges malfunctioned, and lights would react to unseen presences. Another night, while walking the perimeter with Juno, a deep, steady hum filled the air. Not mechanical, but more like a tone resonating from beneath the earth. A pale, dim light hovered momentarily over a hangar before disappearing. When I reported these incidents, leadership offered only vague, dismissive responses. The entire base seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something undefined and potentially extraordinary to unfold. I was a pilot trainee stationed at Area 51 for about 6 months, and nothing about that place was normal. We flew mostly small single-engine planes, twitchy and responsive, perfect for practicing tight maneuvers. My instructor, Lester, was tough but fair. He'd send us out over a specific stretch of desert, mostly flat, with a wide mesa off to the west, running us through navigation drills. It was routine, except for this one zone where everything seemed to glitch. I first noticed it on my third or fourth solo flight, circling near a patch of desert just east of Groom Lake. Nothing too high, maybe 5,000 feet. As I approached that area, my compass started spinning like a broken record. It didn't matter how I banked or turned. It just whirled crazily, refusing to settle on a heading. I figured it was a magnetometer problem and kept flying by relying on visual cues in my GPS. But the radio started acting up too. Static flooded the MEMS, drowning out Lester's voice. I couldn't hear him at all for a solid minute, just that loud, high-pitched crackle. It freaked me out enough to pull back and get away from the zone. Lester was surprisingly calm when I got back to base. Said the equipment had moments like that and told me to log it as an electrical equipment testing issue. The way they dodged questions, the classified status, the silence, it made me uneasy. Eventually, I quit. The longer I stayed, the more I felt like the base was hiding something that wasn't just technology, but something no one wanted to acknowledge. The machines that could phase through walls were just the start. I didn't want to be part of whatever came next. Sometimes I catch myself staring at the spot near my old lab, wondering if those vehicles still vanish and reappear somewhere out there, defying everything we know about physics. Juno, my dog, sometimes stiffens and looks toward the desert, ears alert, like she senses something invisible. I don't know what was really going on, but I'm certain of one thing. Some of the things we uncovered at Area 51 weren't just secret tech. They were something else, something that doesn't fit. And whatever it wasn't done yet. I was flying routine missions near this mesa when strange things started happening. First, a brief interference incident that my supervisor brushed off. No big deal, I thought, but then it kept recurring. Every time I approached that area, my compass would spin wildly and the radio would crackle with static. Electrical interference, weird stuff. On about my fifth or sixth flight, I decided to push a little closer and see what was going on. The wind was brutal that day, gusting hard and shifting unpredictably. Then, just a couple miles from the cliff edge, something stopped me cold. A massive dark shape hung motionless above the mesa. This wasn't like any aircraft I'd ever seen. It was huge, almost rectangular, but with soft edges, completely still despite the fierce winds around it. No engines, no lights, no sound. I pulled back the throttle and banked to keep it in view, trying to radio in what I was seeing, but nothing worked. Total static. I stared, wondering if I was imagining things. The shape remained perfectly immobile. Then, in an instant, it vanished. One moment there, the next. Just empty sky and wind-blown dust. Back at base, I reported exactly what happened, stuck to the facts. Told Lester about the shape and the instrument failures. He seemed unsurprised, nodding quietly. When I asked around later, no one would confirm seeing anything similar. Then things got really strange. My entire flight log from that day disappeared, completely blank. The tracking system showed nothing, no video, no data. I checked with maintenance, and they confirmed the system was fully operational. When I pressed Lester, he just mumbled about data glitches. I got the message. Don't ask questions. Since then, I've kept my distance from that mesa. The compass still spins, the radio still hisses, and something about that place just feels wrong. I woke to a low rumble just after midnight, not thunder. The sky was clear, but the whole house trembled like a distant freight train was passing underneath the foundation. I lay still, listening to the bass note grow stronger, then fade into silence. My dog Bramble, a brindle shepherd mix with a twitchy tail, lifted her head, ears pricked, and whimpered once before settling back down. The next morning, I opened the kitchen window to let in the cool desert air. The glass was fogged over, beads of condensation clinging like dew. I ran my finger across it and watched as a dark shape held its form, a tall figure, arms outstretched, before melting away into a smear. I pressed harder, but there was nothing on the other side. I wiped the glass clean and looked out at the empty backyard. That evening, I sat on the porch with Bramble at my feet. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving a thin pink glow on the hills. I heard the rumble again, softer this time, like something shifting underground. Bramble growled low, her fur lifting along her spine. I checked the desert floor. Just sand, scrub brush, and the old water tank I'd inherited from the farmhouse's previous owner. I told myself it was nothing but the wind, though I knew better. 2 nights later, I woke before dawn. The house vibrated louder now, and the floorboards hummed. I stumbled into the hallway, feeling the walls pulse around me. Bramble padded behind, panting. I flicked on a lamp in the living room. The windows were gone, completely covered in heavy condensation, chalky like frost, with patterns swirling in circles. I reached out and the mist peeled away in lines, as if something had run its fingers over the glass. When I pulled my hand back, there was only my own print. I found a flashlight and stepped outside. During my flight training, I encountered something similar. Near a patch of earth in Nevada, the rules seemed to change. Instruments died. Radio went dead. Something hovered silent and still, defying logic. I finished my training and left the base shortly after. No one ever mentioned that flight again. And if you look for it in the official records, it's like it never happened. But I remember. And I still wonder what I flew so close to, hovering just out of reach over that lonely mesa. My chest rumbled as the slippers brushed against my feet. Something felt off. Bramble tensed, teeth exposed, and darted toward the yard's edge. She froze at the corner, staring into blackness while I swept my flashlight across the horizon. Nothing stirred. No headlights, no wildlife, just desert shadows dancing in the wind. Earlier that day, I'd driven into town for groceries. The diner looked normal, but the locals seemed worn down. Mr. Lin mentioned hearing a low-frequency hum for weeks. Maria, the waitress, nervously rubbed her arms and complained about windows fogging up despite cranking the heat. No one offered any explanation. Night fell quietly. No tremors, no strange sounds. I slept more soundly than I had in weeks. At dawn, I discovered the backyard glass door ajar, its latch unhooked. Bramble watched me with worried eyes from the porch. I secured the door and checked every window lock. The condensation had vanished, but faint footprints in the dirt caught my eye, small, like a child's, trailing toward distant hills. 2 days passed. After sunset, thick fog rolled in, consuming the porch light and turning everything gray. I drew the curtains and held Bramble close. The familiar hum returned, low, steady, vibrating through my teeth. Glass steamed instantly, ghostly patterns forming in the corners, fleeting images, a face, a hand, then nothing. Bramble growled and leaped away, fur standing on end. I switched on lights and television for comfort. Local news droned about dust storms and rattlesnakes, silent on mysterious rumblings. On the 5th night, I prepared tomato soup for us. Bramble sat at the table, enjoying her chili-spiced portion. Mid-meal, the rumble began. My spoon clattered. The table trembled. Soup waves lapped the bowl's rim. Bramble's whiskers twitched as she backed away. Glass cabinet doors rattled, then sudden silence. Everything stopped. Even Bramble went still. Placing my hands on the table, I felt a faint, pulsing warmth beneath the surface, like a hidden heartbeat. I pushed my chair back, abandoning the soup. I needed fresh air. Bramble followed, padding softly over gravel. The trip began like any other camping weekend. My brother Caleb, our friends Sarah and Tim, and I drove out to a spot near Groom Lake, just past the edge of the restricted zone. We wanted to escape the city noise and cell service, hoping or spend nights under the stars without distractions. I've camped around Nevada for years, but this place felt different. A quiet that wasn't normal settled over us. We arrived late afternoon on a hot, dry day in early June. The sky was mostly clear, with a thin haze on the horizon, blurring the mountains like an old photo. We chose a spot near some scrub brush about a mile from the lake bed, on a gentle slope with a view of the flat desert stretching ahead. Our campfire had just started to crackle when Caleb's usually mellow dog, Roscoe, suddenly stiffened and growled low. That caught everyone's attention, and we all turned. Later, under a sky full of stars, we stood in the night breeze. The fog bank had burned off earlier. No movement, no sign of any disturbance or intruder, just the empty desert breathing under the moon. By morning, the windows were clear, with every trace of night's condensation gone. Fresh footprints lined the fence, small, neat ovals spaced as if someone had been treading carefully. I packed a bag that day, planning to stay with a friend 2 towns over. But each time I approached the front door, I felt watched, something lurking just beneath my feet, waiting to be noticed. That night, I dreamed of shapes forming on glass, glowing lines etched into walls, and a low hum rising from below. I woke stiff and heavy-eyed, with Bramble pressed close. I told her everything would be okay, but my voice sounded distant. At dawn, I opened my eyes to the front door. The driveway was empty. My suitcase sat where I'd left it. The sun cleared the horizon. For the first time in days, I heard only wind in the sagebrush and the soft toenails of Bramble clacking on the porch. I'm still here, watching the highway, waiting for my friend's truck. The rumble hasn't returned. The windows remain clear, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm not the one who decided to leave. Something has been pulling at the edges of this place, and I'm uncertain when they'll follow. The desert was quiet that night when something caught our eye. Low to the ground, about 200 feet away, a shape hovered silently. It wasn't like any helicopter or drone we'd seen before. No sound, no mechanical noise, just a soft, steady glow. The object was triangular, roughly the size of a small car, with no visible seams or windows. Its edges seemed almost ethereal, like a shadow you could reach out and touch. The light was dim, almost as if it was trying to remain unnoticed. Hovering around 10 feet above the ground, it remained perfectly still despite the breeze rustling nearby bushes. Then, slowly, it descended and touched the sand. Something felt different where it landed. The ground seemed colder, as if the day's heat had been completely drained from that spot. Caleb stepped closer and reached down, quickly pulling his hand back like the cold had stung him. Roscoe was barking differently now, not his usual excited bark, but a sharp, tense warning. When I tried to take a picture, my phone screen went blank. No signal, no battery icon. Sarah's phone did the same, and Tim's watch stopped completely. We backed up, feeling trapped. The silence was heavy and oppressive. The craft remained motionless, its light unchanged. After several minutes, the lights inside the triangle began to dim until almost completely dark. Then, as silently as it had arrived, it rose straight up into the sky and vanished. The desert seemed to exhale. Tension lifted, the air warmed, and the breeze picked up as if nothing had happened. We sat in stunned silence, Roscoe still alert but calmer. We left early the next morning. Our devices remained unusable for hours, even miles away. During the drive home, an unsettling sensation persisted, like we were being watched. Glancing repeatedly in the rearview mirror revealed only empty road and sky. I can't explain what we saw that night. It wasn't anything I've encountered before or read about. One thing was certain, it was far from a normal desert experience. The night shift was winding down when the unexpected shipment arrived just past 11 p.m. I was on my final run of the evening, driving the forklift out to Dock 12, where half a dozen white crates sat under the floodlights. Nobody had mentioned these were coming. The crates were substantial, about 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, sealed with strange symbols I'd never encountered before. Interlocking triangles and circles painted in a dull silver glinted under the light. When I tapped one with my gloved knuckles, my breath fogged in the air. Something felt different about the cold. It wasn't the usual desert chill, but more like the inside of a walk-in freezer draining warmth from my bones. I tried calling Hank, one of the welders, but the radio in my vest crackled and died. As I hauled a crate onto the forks and rolled toward the storage bay, a strange cold seemed to drift behind me, parting when I turned the corner. The wall temperature gauge read normal, low 40s, but the air around those crates felt at least 10 degrees colder. Inside the storage bay, other maintenance workers were loading parts into bins. I set the crate down, and suddenly a low hum started in the walls, vibrating like a massive transformer. Sarah from logistics looked up, frowning. "You bring these in?" she asked. I shook my head. She ran her hand over one of the mysterious symbols. Then everything changed. The lights flickered. The hum grew louder, echoing through the steel beams. I reached for the emergency backup switch, but every light in the bay went out except a single red LED hovering over the crates. The hum faded to silence, leaving us in complete darkness save for that red dot. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, landing on the crate symbols. They glowed softly, shining silver. No one spoke. I backed out of the bay, my light dancing over equipment and cables until power returned. 30 seconds later, regular lights clicked on. The hum was gone, and the crates looked as if they'd been there for weeks. The next morning, I checked the logs. The delivery manifest showed classified crates with no origin or contents. When I asked supervision, I only received a brief, cryptic briefing. Something about that place had changed, becoming colder, quieter, heavier, and I still wonder if we were just lucky to be there to see it. I was sweeping the hangar floor under the sun, my mind still echoing with fragments of conversations about top-secret program requirements. The day felt heavy, weighted by something unseen behind the fence. That night, I brought Roscoe, my German Shepherd mix I'd adopted last month, to the base. While he ran in the yard near the guard station, I checked on the crates. Yard lights stretched long shadows across the scrub brush. Suddenly, Roscoe stopped at the fence line, nose raised, hackles bristling. A low growl escaped him. My flashlight revealed nothing, but that familiar metallic chill returned, like breathing next to ice. I patted Roscoe, muttering about drafts, though my teeth chattered. The bay door stood unlocked. The crates had vanished without a trace. No forklift tracks, no skid marks. I radioed security, but gate cameras showed an empty bay all night. Only the red LED above the doorway continued blinking quietly. Over the next few days, a soft hum emerged. At first, it whispered like a distant idling engine, then grew louder, thrumming inside maintenance tunnel walls. Welders, electricians, janitors, we all heard it. Sometimes it would start mid-afternoon, creeping through pipes and vibrating fixtures overhead. When it stopped, an exhaling silence engulfed the entire base. That week, something strange began happening. About half a dozen of us started sharing the same dream. In my version, I and the supply bay, crates stacked high, darkness surrounding me. 2 white pinprick eyes glowed at the back wall. I'd wake up gasping, sheets twisted. Sarah saw a similar vision, but from outside the bay doors. Hank witnessed the eyes through a floor grate. Over coffee, we compared notes, something we'd never done before. This was too bizarre to ignore. One night, walking back to my quarters, the familiar hum returned. Low, persistent. Behind the corridor walls, Roscoe padded beside me. Following the sound, I discovered a service hatch I'd never noticed. The grate felt warm beneath my hand. The hum pulsed through my fingers, steady as a heartbeat. With no one else around, I radioed maintenance. It was my shift. I crouched and pried the grate free. Darkness stretched below, cool air flowing upward. My flashlight beam revealed an endless black shaft. Roscoe whined softly, licking my hand. 2 nights after dropping the grate, my heart hammering, I was on patrol in the guard tower when the floodlights cut out across the yard. Stars pinpricked a clean slate sky above. The comms radio spat static, then fell silent. My torch flicked outside, revealing shadow shapes moving along the fence, tall and rigid, slipping between light and darkness. They looked like soldiers, but too tall, too straight, flowing along the fence line like smoke on a breeze. No movement except their fluid motion. I banged on the glass. Roscoe woke with a start, barking into the dark. The shapes froze instantly and vanished like slapped water. Floodlights clicked back on, and the world returned to normal. My voice cracked as I radioed Central, calling it a false alarm, probably wildlife. By then I was done. Keys dangling, Roscoe at my heels, I went home. My roommate Mel whispered about her dream again. "Ah, eyes," she said, white eyes in the dark. Roscoe padded by her door, nose low, ears pinned. Now I try to forget, but my flashlight stays close to the bed. Roscoe follows me whenever I get water. Sometimes I swear I feel the hum behind the walls, those white eyes glowing faintly at the window until I blink, and they're gone. Earlier that night, around 10, I got the call about Hangar D4 needing a scrub down after a new drop-off. I grabbed my gear and Riley, a short-haired mutt with pointy ears and nervous energy perfect for late shifts. The desert was cooling, but air still smelled of sun-baked metal. At the base gate, the scanner light blinked green. Riley's tail wagged once before settling back in the cab. Hangar D4 sat in near complete darkness. Only a single motion-activated bulb hung above the door. I clipped my ID badge, heard the lock click, and stepped inside. Riley sniffed the ground, nosing crates and coiled cables. My headlamp flicked on, and I leaned the mop in the corner. The hangar was cavernous and silent, save for the soft overhead air handler hum. Starting at the far end, I used the pressure washer to rinse oil stains from the concrete floor. Riley followed, paws slapping wet patches. Water pulled around a stack of wooden pallets, then drained into floor grates. Up close, the walls looked freshly sprayed. Fresh paint, no scuffs. The space was nearly empty, with just a few flight cases and a single rolling ladder tucked against the wall. As I climbed up to wipe the overhead pipes, a low, rhythmic vibration caught my attention, almost like a distant pulse. My hand gripped the ladder rail, and I froze. Riley, at the bottom, went completely still, ears perked. "You hear that?" I called out, but my voice dissolved into the echo. The pulse vanished, leaving only the steady hum of the air handler. I shrugged and wiped my brow, climbing down. While wheeling the ladder back, the lights began to flicker, bright, then dim. Riley barked and bolted toward the hangar door. I followed, but the door wouldn't open. The scanner panel glowed red. No power. I patted Riley's head. The light switch by the door did nothing, but suddenly the overhead bulb snapped on, casting yellow light across the floor. My phone's battery was blinking red, and the radio on my vest produced only static when I tried channel 3. Sweeping with my headlamp beam, something at the shadow's edge made me stop. A disc-shaped outline hovered silently, 10 feet up, just beyond the stacked pallets. A perfect circle of solid darkness that seemed to absorb light, covered in a gossamer-thin film that shimmered when my light passed over it. Riley whined, nosing the air. The space smelled of burnt ozone, like aftermath of a lightning strike. My gloved hand moved toward the object, fingers passing through a misty edge before I stopped myself. In an instant, the disc vanished. I swept my headlamp around. Nothing. Riley circled me, a low growl rumbling. Backing away, I continued sweeping until the overhead bulb popped and died, plunging us into darkness. My phone was dead. Only Riley's red collar glowed, along with starlight seeping under the hangar door. Feeling along the wall, I found the keypad. This time it was green, and the door unlatched with a groan. We slipped out into the night. I slid out into the cool night, floodlights snapping on behind us as the hangar door clicked shut. Everything hummed back to normal once I re-engaged the scanner and radio. A patrol ATV rolled by, its driver eyeing Riley and me. "Everything okay?" he called. "Just a flicker," I said tightly. He grunted and rode off into the desert. The quiet night stretched ahead as I loaded up the gear and drove home. Riley slept in the passenger seat, snoring lightly. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror at Hangar D4's dark silhouette. The truck's dash clock blinked 12:03, though I was sure it was closer to 1 a.m. At home, I set the broom by the back door and checked on Riley. He stared at the hallway like something triggered a memory. Lying in bed, I tossed and turned, convinced I saw soap-thin ripples on my bedroom wall with each blink. When dawn broke, I drove back to the base to drop off equipment. Peering through the tiny window in Hangar D4's door, I found nothing. Empty. Lights off, no disc, no scorched concrete, not even a greasy fingerprint where I'd reached out. A mechanic in the weld shop asked if I'd lost sleep. I shrugged. Just a bad breaker, I think. That night, I found my mop lying across the hallway floor, as if dropped in a hurry. I set it upright, Riley following my every move. I closed the door, turned off the lights, leaving only the street lamp's glow. Listening for a hum, half expecting a thin shimmer across the wall, I heard only Riley's steady breathing and the quiet refrigerator downstairs. Normal. And yet, a memory lingered, something that didn't belong. A perfect circle, smooth and still, cloaked in impossibly thin film. Gone in a blink, leaving only the smell of ozone and a question I couldn't shake. The heat of the day was sliding away, and the sky over Rachel wore that dusty rose color where Groom Lake sits just beyond the horizon. I'd been doing this for 10 years. Ranching isn't glamorous, but it's steady work. Duncan, my Australian Shepherd mix, suddenly froze beside me and let out a low wind. That night felt different. I climbed down from the fence line post and walked toward the pens, calling for Duncan. My dog Duncan stirred beside me, ears alert. Something was off with the cattle. They were restless, shifting and lowing softly, their tails twitching nervously. I swept my flashlight across the brush, expecting to see a coyote, but found nothing. Then they appeared. 3 impossibly tall figures, moving between the feeder and far gate. They towered over me, at least a head taller, with limbs that seemed unnaturally stretched. Arms dangled past their knees, legs too long for their bodies. They moved in perfect sync, causing the cattle to scatter. Duncan let out a low, urgent bark. The figures stopped and turned toward me. Where their faces should have been was only darkness, No features, just shadowy voids where eyes might be. In an eerie, coordinated motion, they raised one arm in a slow wave and began walking away, gliding smoothly across the ground. "Hey!" I called out, hoping for a response. Silence. They slipped between the pens and disappeared into the low scrub. My heart raced as I crouched by the rail. Duncan pressed close, his tail rigid. Then the lights appeared. Not like a patrol truck. These beams hovered around 30 feet high, blinking in a precise grid. 3 flashes, a pause, then 3 more flashes. This continued for minutes beyond my calf pastures. I checked my watch, 8:12 p.m. No sound accompanied the lights. No motor hum, no radio static. My phone showed no signal. The truck was a quarter-mile away by the barn. I considered running, but didn't want to leave the cattle alone. The figures emerged again, silhouetted against the blinking lights. They walked toward the illumination, which pulsed brighter as they approached, almost like a greeting. Something held me in place. My legs felt heavy, unresponsive. Duncan whined, tugging at his leash, urging us back. I let him lead me to the barn. Inside, the flickering lights cast dancing shadows on the corrugated wall. I grabbed the rifle from its rack, not for a confrontation, but for comfort. Hugging it close, I cracked the sliding door open and peered out. The desert stretched out, empty and still. I'd been watching since last night, when those strange figures moved among the blinking lights. Duncan pressed against my leg as I pulled the door closed and latched it. My lantern flickered weakly. 20 minutes passed before I dared step outside again. The horizon was dark, only moonlight visible. Everything looked normal. The cattle grazed peacefully, as if nothing unusual had happened. I walked the perimeter, shining my beam into every corner. No signs of people, no vehicles, just shrubs and rocks. Sweat soaked through my shirt by the time I returned inside. I called my neighbor, who worked the next spread over. Voicemail picked up. "Hey, saw something. Better drop by," I mumbled quickly. That night, I lay in my bunk with Duncan on the floor, listening to the ranch fan spin. Moonlight traced a stripe across the floor while my mind replayed those figures. Limbs too long, faces too dark, lights blinking like a secret door in the sky. Morning arrived slowly. I went through my routine, feeding cattle, checking fences under a pale sun. My thoughts kept drifting west, to that cluster of shrubs where the shapes had vanished. When my neighbor arrived on his ATV, coffee in hand, I pointed out what I'd seen. He dismissed it. "Firelight reflections," he said, "or a crop sprayer with a broken nav light." He clapped his hands against the rifle rack. I nodded but didn't believe him. Later, I drove beyond the ranch boundary. Nothing but desert fence posts and the curved service road. Back home, I walked Duncan to the cattle pens. They watched us, chewing slowly, scattering when I clicked my tongue. Every rustle of sage made me turn, scanning the landscape. Tonight, I'll sleep on the porch. Lawn chair, gun across my lap, Duncan at my feet. I'll watch that horizon, waiting for a flicker. Maybe tomorrow, I'll find those mysterious prints in the dust, tracks that start and simply stop. I was hauling freight from Reno to Phoenix, a route that winds through Nevada's desert near Area 51. This stretch of highway was familiar to me. I'd driven it countless times, mostly during night or early morning hours. But this particular day in early June was different. The late afternoon heat clung to my truck's cab as I rolled along. Sunlight dipped low, casting long shadows across rocky highway formations. A slight wind kicked up dust, creating that familiar desert stillness. Country music played softly on the radio while I watched the landscape. Suddenly, a convoy appeared ahead. At first glance, it looked like a standard military transport, about 10 trucks and armored vehicles lined up perfectly on the highway shoulder. Something was off, though. These vehicles were completely stationary. Engines silent, drivers and passengers standing outside in small groups. They were all focused intently on something beyond the road's edge. Following their gaze, I spotted it. A massive orb suspended between 2 rocky mounds, roughly 100 yards away. This wasn't like any aircraft I'd ever seen. Its surface resembled a dull pearl, pulsing with a soft, steady inner light that shifted slowly between pale blue and faint amber. Absolute silence surrounded the scene. No engine sounds, no mechanical hum, just the whisper of wind through desert scrub. The men near their trucks stood completely motionless, as if the orb had hypnotized them. I felt a chill run down my spine. Checking my dashboard confirmed everything was normal. Gauges steady, though the radio had dissolved into static. Cautious, I kept my distance but rolled down the window, straining to understand what I was witnessing. Something about this moment felt completely surreal, suspended between reality and something entirely unexplainable. The desert stretched out endlessly, and I wasn't looking for trouble. I was just passing through with Roscoe, my dog, when something strange happened on the highway. An orb appeared, and everything around me seemed to freeze. The military convoy stopped dead in its tracks, with men standing motionless near their trucks. At first, I thought it might be a training exercise or some optical illusion, but nothing about the scene made sense. The orb began to rise slowly, its pulsing light dimming. Suddenly, the men near the trucks snapped back to life, as if waking from a deep trance. Engines roared to life, and the convoy rolled on, acting like nothing had happened. I stayed behind, watching the spot where the orb had been until it vanished completely. When I finally rejoined the highway, it was like the entire incident had been wiped clean. No emergency crews showed up. No radio chatter mentioned anything unusual. At a gas station down the road, the clerk looked at me like I was crazy when I asked about the stopped convoy. My watch told me an hour had passed, though it felt like mere minutes. Night fell quickly, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had occurred. Roscoe was unusually calm, which wasn't like him in a new place. From our motel room near bay, I stared out at the stars, scanning the horizon for any sign of the orb's return. The next morning, the convoy was gone. No tracks, no evidence, just me, Roscoe, and the empty desert. I couldn't explain what I'd seen. Was it a military experiment? Something else entirely? Whatever it wasn't just a routine truck stop. There was a deliberate silence, a sense that the desert had been waiting for something we weren't supposed to notice. For the rest of the trip, I kept looking over my shoulder, wondering if I was being watched. Something had happened out there, just beyond the edge of the road, something that defied explanation. And I knew, deep down, that I'd witnessed something I was never meant to see. Nevada's desert had always been a familiar landscape to me, but this night felt different. I'd camped out here before, yet never this close to the boundary fence. Early fall meant cooler nights, though the air remained characteristically dry. My small tent sat on a flat patch of sand near a gravel service road about 100 feet from the chain-link barrier. Scout, my companion, was initially restless but calmed once the campfire flickered to life. The night seemed typical. Distant highway sounds and occasional desert wildlife chirps were our only soundtrack. I kept the fire low, careful not to attract unwanted attention. Watchtowers loomed in the shadows, their bright floodlights slowly sweeping across the barren landscape. Around midnight, something unusual happened. The floodlights suddenly dimmed and then vanished completely, as if a massive switch had been flipped. Darkness consumed the entire area. No sounds broke the silence except the soft breeze and Scout's quiet breathing. What caught my attention was a strange light emerging from deep within the base. Faint, rhythmic pulses began, a soft, bluish-white glow that blinked in a deliberate, almost signal-like pattern. These weren't like standard floodlights or vehicle headlights. Something about them felt intentional. Scout's ears perked up, and he let out a low growl toward the fence. The light pulses continued for about 3 minutes, sometimes nearly disappearing, then brightening again. I tried counting their rhythm, but an irregular pattern made it challenging. Just as I was about to grab my phone, the power abruptly restored. Floodlights blazed back to life, harsh and wide. But when I looked toward the source of those mysterious pulses, everything appeared completely normal. No guards patrolled, no vehicles idled, and the usual mechanical hum had vanished. The entire sector seemed suspended in an eerie stillness. I watched for nearly an hour, but nothing moved. Scout remained tense, staring intently at the fence as if he could see through its metal links. Gradually, I began to relax, trying to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. I've lived out here on the outskirts of Rachel, Nevada for most of my life. My family's ranch is maybe 6-7 miles from that fenced-off government patch everyone calls Area 51. Most folks around here don't like to talk about what goes on near the base, but I've seen things over the years that I can't explain. For a while now, we've had these helicopters, unmarked, no logos or numbers, that come out after dark. They're loud when they fly in low and slow, patrolling just above the desert scrub. But sometimes they'll suddenly stop and hover so quietly that you could hear a pin drop if it wasn't for the faint whir of the blades. It's weird the way they move. I'm not the type to spin wild stories, but what I'm about to say is real, even if I don't fully understand it. One night, something strange happened. Maybe it was a glitch or some kind of equipment test. The desert night returned to its usual quiet. The next morning, I woke early, sipping coffee outside my tent. Scout was sniffing around, digging a little here and there. When I looked down at the sand near where I'd been sitting the night before, I saw something that made my skin crawl. Several perfectly round burn marks in the sand. They were maybe the size of a dinner plate, blackened in the center with rings fading out to the edges. They didn't look like campfire scorch marks or anything from my stove. No rocks or fire pits nearby, just these odd circular burns in an otherwise untouched patch of sand. I walked along the fence line, scanning for footprints or tire tracks. Nothing but my own tracks and Scout's paw prints. No sign anyone had been near us. No vehicles. No footprints from guards. I packed up and left right after breakfast. I didn't want to stick around. Something about those burn marks and that blackout didn't feel right. Like I'd been watched, maybe tested without knowing it. Back home, I tried looking up if anyone else had seen strange lights or power glitches near the base, but there's never any official word. I kept the photos I took of the burn marks, but the images didn't capture the way they looked in person. Oddly precise, almost unnatural. Sometimes at night, I swee, or I can still see those pulses in my mind, slow and steady, coming from somewhere just beyond the fence. And Scout won't sleep near me without keeping his ears up, as if whatever it was out there left something behind. The desert was quiet that night, just past midnight, with only an occasional breeze breaking the silence. I was out checking on the herd near the eastern fence line, closest to the base where helicopters had been buzzing earlier. My old dog Rufus, a lean border collie mix with sharp eyes, was unusually nervous, pacing with his ears pinned back. Under the thin sliver of moonlight, I spotted a figure standing just beyond the barbed wire fence, about 50 yards out. At first, I thought it might be a base guard, but something felt off. The shape was tall, around 60.5 feet, and completely motionless. No shifting weight, no breathing, nothing. It was like a statue. When I called out softly, there was no response. Rufus growled low and pulled at the leash, trying to back away. As I squinted to make out details, I noticed something strange about the figure. Its edges seemed unnaturally smooth, almost like it was wrapped in a skin that didn't reflect moonlight correctly. It didn't resemble any uniform or clothing I recognized. Then, in an instant, it was gone. Not walking away, but simply vanished, as if someone had erased it from existence. My heart raced, and Rufus barked sharply. I spent the next hour searching the area with my flashlight, but found nothing. The sand remained untouched, with only our own tracks visible. In the weeks following that night, the cattle began acting peculiar. Normally calm at dusk, they became skittish and jumpy, constantly looking toward the fence line and startling at the slightest sound. Soon after, I noticed several cattle missing from different parts of the ranch. There were no tracks from predators, no signs of mountain lions or coyotes. Something was definitely not right. Nights here feel different now. The desert stretches out cold and quiet, in a way that doesn't make sense. I worked security at the base near Groom Lake, Area 51, as everyone calls it, for about 5 years. My job wasn't about waving at tourists. It was mostly late shifts, staring out into the emptiness, watching for anything unusual. Standard protocol was simple. Check the fences, watch the perimeter, report trespassers or wildlife. But sometimes the rules would shift without warning. No announcements over the radios, no new bulletin board notices, just a sudden change. One day, routine rounds got replaced with orders to monitor the skies. No explanation given, no extra patrols, just watch. We called these the blackout shifts. Compound lights would dim. Radios fell silent except for hushed whispers. The usual machine hum seemed to fade away. Then my livestock started vanishing. The ground where they disappeared was clean. No blood, no hair, no drag marks. I checked with neighbors, but no one else reported missing animals. The numbers didn't lie. One night while walking the fence line with Rufus, I heard that worrying noise again. Helicopters circled low. Suddenly, one stopped right above us, silent as a ghost. I looked up and caught a quick flash of light from the base, like a camera burst or distant spotlight. The helicopter seemed to shimmer, its edges bending like a heat mirage. Rufus froze and whimpered. I wanted to move, to get away, but something kept me rooted. The helicopter hung motionless for what felt like forever, then vanished into the night without a sound. Since then, I watch closely, especially near the fence. I don't bring friends out here anymore. I keep Rufus close. I've never reported this to anyone. I'm not sure it would help, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to know more. But every night when the helicopters return and the fence line grows still, I feel watched. Like whatever that thing was, it's still out there, just beyond reach, waiting. The desert night was black and familiar, clear, dry, and cold in early spring around 2 a.m. Stars blanketed the sky, the Milky Way a bright ribbon overhead. I'd grown accustomed to the occasional coyote howl and distant plane drone from my shifts on the base near the salt flats. But that night was different. Without warning, dozens of glowing orbs appeared, hovering silently in the sky. My first thought was a training exercise, maybe flare tests or drone maneuvers. Yet these weren't like anything I'd encountered before. They moved with impossible precision. Tight clusters would shift into long, bird-like migration lines, but completely silent and smooth. No engine noise, no blinking lights, no radio chatter. Their most bizarre characteristic was how they bent light, shimmering like heat waves above a desert road, but steadier and more solid. Sometimes they'd vanish, only to reappear slightly displaced. Communication was impossible. The comms were dead, just static. The entire base seemed to hold its breath as I watched these strange phenomena for nearly 20 minutes. Eventually, they drifted toward the northwest horizon, disappearing over distant mountains. I scanned with binoculars, but radar showed nothing. Absolutely nothing. My official report the next day received a standard response, unidentified aerial phenomena consistent with classified aircraft testing, nothing more. Other nights followed similar patterns, shifts where we'd simply watch the sky, sometimes the orbs returning, sometimes not. Always that same strange light-bending silence, shapes shifting in the night, impossible to track or explain. My team tried to joke or ignore these encounters, but I knew what I'd seen. These weren't drones, flares, or any military craft in any manual. They moved with an almost living precision, not quite alive, but definitely not natural. After leaving the base, I'd find myself scanning night skies, half expecting their return. I never saw them again. But sometimes, when the wind is just right, I remember those impossible orbs and wonder. When the desert night settles into a perfect stillness, something watches. Not with hostility, just a quiet observation. My time at Area 51 wasn't filled with wild tales or conspiracy theories, just long nights staring into an endless sky, sensing something others missed. I spent just over a year on the security team, mostly running checkpoints and managing biometric scans. My job was keeping unauthorized personnel out, ensuring only cleared individuals entered. The security systems seemed foolproof, but they weren't. Not completely. One particular checkpoint near the back gate always felt different. It led to a restricted zone few knew about. The scanners were supposed to be cutting edge, retina, fingerprint, voice recognition, plus some proprietary technology the higher-ups claimed was state-of-the-art. But these machines had quirks. Sometimes the scans wouldn't work correctly. They wouldn't just error out, but would freeze entirely or refuse to capture data. More unsettling, the system would occasionally reject people with valid clearances while inexplicably allowing unauthorized individuals to pass through. These glitches made you want to look away, to ignore what was happening. The checkpoint had an unusual atmosphere. Strange shadows flickered on cameras. Electromagnetic interference would appear without explanation. We were instructed to report such occurrences, but never to discuss them. One cloudless night, with stars scattered like pinpricks across the sky and the desert wind whispering softly, I was working a late shift alone. Most personnel were elsewhere. Around 2:30 a.m., an alarm sounded on my console. A biometric scan had cleared someone at the back gate, someone completely absent from our system. no ID. Identification, no clearance, no record. The impossible had happened. As the screen showed a figure approaching the scanner, I realized this was no ordinary night. The gate opened after the scanners accepted the person. Something was off immediately. On the screen, they moved with an unnatural smoothness, almost gliding. Their dark uniform looked standard, but their face was the real oddity. It wasn't blurry or distorted, it was simply absent. The camera showed a clear outline of head and shoulders, yet no features were visible. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a blank space where a face should be. I tried every possible angle, zooming in repeatedly, but the face remained a void. Checking adjacent cameras revealed nothing, no sign of the person before or after passing through the gate. It was like they'd materialized momentarily and then vanished. The system logs were equally strange. No ID number, no access permissions. This person didn't exist anywhere in our databases. At first, I thought it might be a technical glitch, maybe a corrupted data stream or camera malfunction. But then, the back gate checkpoint's camera feed completely died. The screens froze in static for about 10 seconds before rebooting to normal feeds. The mysterious figure was gone without a trace. My radio went dead, nothing but static. A sense of unease crept over me as I walked toward the checkpoint. Outside, the desert was silent except for distant generator hums. My flashlight revealed nothing unusual, no footprints, no disturbed dust. The next day, things got even weirder. When I tried discussing the incident, everyone acted like it never happened. The footage had vanished from the archives. In the following days, the biometric scanners at the back gate continued behaving erratically. They'd randomly reject authorized personnel or lock up entirely. The higher-ups started quietly rerouting traffic away from that checkpoint, as if trying to erase the entire event. I didn't last much longer at the job. Something about that incident left me deeply unsettled. Whatever happened wasn't a normal malfunction. It was something else entirely. The kind of experience that lingers in the back of your mind, defying explanation. The Nevada desert had been my escape, a place to clear my head and get away from everything. I was camping out with my dog Rusty, a scrappy little mutt with an energy that never seemed to quit and a bark that sounded more like an attempt at conversation. Late summer was settling in, and the sky was darkening around dusk. Clear and expansive, the landscape stretched out before me as I hiked along a rough trail near the edges of Groom Lake. There were no clear markers, just distant giant fences hinting at the boundary of something more secretive. I'd seen videos of people getting close to Area 51, and curiosity was getting the better of me. Rusty was busy sniffing around, and I wasn't paying much attention when suddenly a strange feeling washed over me. Something wasn't right. The desert's silence was broken only by wind rustling through sparse brush. Then, without a sound, no engine, no tires, an unmarked black pickup appeared on the dirt road just feet away. It was as if the truck materialized out of nowhere. When the driver's window slowly slid down, I looked up and saw something that immediately felt wrong. The man's eyes caught the dim light differently. They glowed with a pale, eerie light, not a reflection, but an internal illumination. Subtle yet unmistakable, the glow was just enough to be unsettling. He stared directly at me, not saying a word, his gaze so intense it felt like he was reading my entire being. Rusty started growling, his hackles raised, but the driver didn't react. After what seemed like an eternity, but was probably just seconds, the window rolled back up. The truck disappeared down the dirt path, silent, and without headlights, as if it had never existed. The desert returned to its quiet state, with only Rusty's breathing and distant cicada hums breaking the silence. I didn't wait around to see if they would return. I quickly headed back to my campsite, constantly looking over my shoulder, realizing that sometimes you think you know everything, only to discover there are things that can never be fully explained. I worked at Area 51 for a few years, not as a pilot or security guard, but down in maintenance. Most people think the base is just runways and hangars, but there's an entire underground network nobody discusses. They called them maintenance tunnels, though I never understood why, since they weren't just for pipes and cables. These tunnels were strange. The walls weren't standard concrete, but smooth, almost unnaturally perfect. Strange geometric symbols were etched everywhere. Lines, triangles, and circles arranged in patterns that made no sense. At first, I thought they might be technical markings or some kind of code, but these shapes had a faint, dull blue glow that pulsed slowly in the darkness. My job was simple: clean these tunnels. Just me, a flashlight, a mop, and a bucket. The air always felt dry and cold, even when it was scorching outside. When I asked about the symbols once, supervisors just gave me a look and changed the subject. We were told not to talk about it. Most shifts were quiet, just the ventilation system's hum and my mop scraping the floor. But sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I'd catch movement, shadows that didn't belong to me. I'd look directly and nothing would be there, just a quick flicker, something moving too fast to be human. Once, I swear I saw a tall, thin figure pause behind a corner, then vanish completely. The whole place had a secretive feeling, but these tunnels were different. It was like they were hiding something much bigger. Later, something happened with a truck that I can't quite explain. I kept wondering if I'd been watched for hours, maybe even days, before that moment. When I got home and told friends, they laughed it off, said it was probably just a trick of light or someone with weird contact lenses. But I can't shake the feeling it was more than that. The way the person moved, the silence, the glow in their eyes, none of it made sense. Sometimes I wonder if my dog Rusty saw more than I did. Since that night, he's been skittish, especially in open spaces and after dark. I'm pretty sure I wasn't the one in control that night. And I don't think we'll ever really know what I ran into. I never meant to get close to Area 51. I was camping in the Nevada desert, just trying to escape everything, with my dog Rusty, a scrappy little mutt with tons of energy and a weird bark. It wasn't some planned mission, more like dumb curiosity and bad timing. I told Jonas, another maintenance guy, about what I'd seen when I turned the light toward it. He'd noticed it too, but nobody wanted to admit anything. He suggested it might be staff from higher up or something else entirely. We didn't joke about it. There was a sense that whatever was down there wasn't meant to be seen. During a late shift, the base was mostly empty and the tunnels were darker than usual due to maintenance on the auxiliary lights. I was near one of the deeper sections where the walls narrowed and the symbols glowed more intensely. While taking a break and leaning against the wall, I heard a faint scratching or tapping from the shadows ahead. I called out, but got no response. My flashlight beam just bounced off the walls when I tried to illuminate the area. The scratching stopped, then resumed more softly, as if something was moving behind the wall. Just as I was about to leave, the tunnel light flickered and went out completely. Darkness surrounded me, with only the faint glow of symbols visible. I dropped my flashlight, and the noise ceased instantly, replaced by heavy silence. Trying to calm myself, I reached for my phone, but it was dead. No signal, not that it mattered down there. After what seemed like an eternity, the tunnel lights clicked back on. I was alone, with no trace of whatever had made the noise. I left early that night. When I told my boss about the power outage, he dismissed it as a routine glitch. But something felt off. The strangest part came when I tried to check the security footage. Every video from that night was missing, not corrupted, just gone. It was like someone, or something, had deliberately deleted them. After a few more similar incidents, I quit. The shadows, the symbols, the silent watchers, it wasn't for me. I never told anyone else, knowing how crazy it would sound. But those tunnels were real. And whatever was moving in the dark, I'm not convinced it was human. The desert was quiet, with just the wind rustling through sparse brush as I hiked along a rough trail near the Groom Lake area. My dog Rusty was sniffing around, and I wasn't paying much attention when suddenly I got this prickling feeling that I wasn't alone. An unmarked black pickup appeared on the dirt road, seemingly out of nowhere. No engine sound, no tire noise. It was like the vehicle materialized from thin air. When the driver's window slowly slid down, I looked up and saw something unexpected. The man's eyes caught the dim light in an unnatural way. They glowed with a pale, eerie light. Not a reflection, but an internal luminescence. Subtle yet unmistakable, the glow was just enough to be deeply unsettling. He stared directly at me, not with a casual glance, but with an intense gaze that felt like he was reading my entire being. No warning, no greeting, just this penetrating look. Rusty growled low, his hackles raised, but the driver didn't react. After what seemed like an eternity, but was probably just seconds, the window rolled back up. The truck disappeared down the dirt path as silently as it had arrived. No headlights, no sound. The desert returned to its previous stillness, broken only by Rusty's breathing and distant cicada hums. I didn't wait around. I hurried back to my campsite, constantly checking over my shoulder, wondering if I'd been watched for hours or even days before this encounter. Back home, I shared the story with friends. They laughed it off, suggesting it was a trick of light or someone wearing unusual contact lenses. But something didn't add up. The way the man moved, the complete silence, those glowing eyes, it was all too strange to dismiss. Night shift started feeling different after that day. Rusty, my dog, became skittish, especially around open spaces and after dark. Something had changed, and I wasn't in control anymore. The morning shift was winding down when the tray clattered behind me. I turned to see it sliding back onto the counter, perfectly clean and gleaming, as if someone had nudged it into place. This tray belonged to the west wall section where security staff ate in shifts. Breakfast, burritos, fruit, and coffee sat untouched. I called out, "Hey, you changing your mind?" Silence answered me. No shuffling, no response. A faint metallic smell hung in the air, like the taste of a coin. I shrugged it off and moved to refill the scrambled eggs. Over the next week, the same thing happened 4 more times. Trays returned untouched, that cold metallic smell always lingering. Some days, I could convince myself I'd misheard the buzzer or misread an order ticket. But then there was the table. While wiping down the long cafeteria table near the huge windows overlooking Groom Lake, I noticed something strange. 3 dark, hand-shaped patches were scorched into the formica surface, each about the size of a grown man's palm. No burns marked the floor or ceiling. Sent these smooth, dark impressions on the tabletop. My heart raced as I radioed maintenance. They arrived, poked around, and shrugged. "Chemical spill," they said, using a green lighting gadget to test the surface. I watched them log it as a cleaning issue, carefully avoiding any mention of the handprints. By evening, a supervisor had them wiped off and repainted so quickly I couldn't even catch the paint code. Something shifted after that moment. The kitchen's atmosphere changed dramatically. Chef Tony, who always hummed opera while stirring soup, fell silent. Lynn, the dishwasher, constantly looked over her shoulder when taking out the garbage. Mara, the new sous chef, stared at the door like she expected someone to burst in at any moment. The next day, hushed whispers echoed from the pantry, voices speaking too rapidly. I cracked the door, expecting to find someone on break, but found only emptiness. Just the walk-in cooler's hum and distant plate clanging broke the silence. That night I left late, rolling my cart, wondering what had really happened. I walked through the hallway, its lights flickering with an eerie pulse. The freezer door creaked, hanging heavy on its hinges. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, and I tried to calm myself. "Greg," I muttered, "you're just jumping at shadows." But something was off. On the floor, 2 small handprints scorched into the vinyl tile caught my eye. Unlike the surrounding area, no other surface showed any burn marks. I snapped a photo with my phone. The flash momentarily illuminated the corridor, but when I checked the image, the tiles looked completely normal. By the end of the week, the staff lunch roster had dwindled. People were calling in sick, transferring to other posts. Mara, who'd been complaining of a headache, disappeared the next day. The supervisor dismissed my concerns, mentioning only some electrical oddities and standard precautions. An afternoon delivery to the North Tower turned strange. The room was dark when I entered, and I set down the trays. Suddenly, the lights snapped on. 6 empty chairs surrounded a metal table. The trays were back on the counter, exactly as I'd left them. A thick, metallic smell hung in the air. A soft click. The door swung shut. I stood frozen, listening to my own breathing. Backing out, I tripped over the threshold. My radio crackled with static when I called for help. The supervisor's voice finally came through. "Give me a minute." The door opened, empty. No trays, no scorch marks, just that persistent smell clinging to my clothes. Later that night, I checked the daily logs. Every incident, returned trays, mysterious handprints, power fluctuations, was logged under operator error. No one had reported the hallway marks or the locked door. I was beginning to question my own sanity. The night was thick with tension. Midnight had just passed when the door to the little store swung open, revealing a man dripping wet. Rain hammered against the pavement outside in heavy sheets. I dropped the pump handle and moved closer. My border collie mix, Java, burst from behind the counter, bristling at the stranger. Water streamed from his jacket as he leaned against the windshield wiper fluid display. "My car stalled," he said, his voice rough. Out past the hills, near an old service road. His wild eyes stared at the ceiling while he shook rain from his hair. I grabbed a towel and handed it over. Java whined, nosing at his boots. A half smile flickered across the man's face when he glanced down at the dog. I poured black coffee without sugar, steam curling into the fluorescent light. He sipped and spoke about a strange encounter. "There was a light floating over the desert," he said. "Glowing yellow-green just hovering above the wash. My engine died as soon as I drove under it." Condensation dripped down the cup's sides as he set it aside. The storm rattled the corrugated awning outside. I tried the radio. Nothing but static. My phone was dead too. He looked real enough. Mud on his jeans, cuts on his knuckles. I wanted to ask more, but he seemed finished talking. When I called the sheriff's office, the line crackled. "Traffic's rough," the dispatcher said. "Call back in the morning." Java kept nudging the man's leg. Finally, he muttered, "Thanks," and drifted back into the night, leaving nothing but questions and the sound of rain. Weeks earlier, another strange scene had unfolded. My kitchen felt oversized, fluorescent lights blazing. Bramble, my dog, refused to enter, barking at darkened windows with no visible threat. I closed every blind and left all lights burning. Sleep came in fractured moments. My dreams were a cafeteria nightmare, trays sliding off counters by themselves, handprints glowing on every surface. I woke drenched in sweat, my apron discarded on the floor. By dawn, I'd called in sick and submitted my resignation. I left the base without looking back, Bramble trailing me along the gravel road toward town. The cafeteria remained behind, pale and silent under the desert sky. I knew its smells and marks would persist long after my departure. The rain had stopped that morning, and the desert was alive with the scent of wet sage. My old pickup rolled down the service road, Java curled in the passenger seat with ears pressed back as we hit the dirt. Tracking the tire tracks the man had mentioned, I scanned for ruts where asphalt gave way to sand. A mile out, I spotted them. Deep grooves veered off the road toward the wash. Parking, I stepped out onto ground softened by rain. Droplets clung to every brush stem as I followed the tracks, Java quietly padding beside me. They ended abruptly at the edge of a broad, shallow wash. No skid marks, no indication the driver had turned around. Just tracks stopping as if the truck had simply vanished. I swept my flashlight across the washbed. Smooth sand, small stones, a few lizard tracks. No sign of vehicle or person. Java's tail stood stiff, and an uneasy feeling crept over me. Stepping back toward the truck, I noticed the horizon where ridges dipped. A fleeting glimpse of something curved caught my eye. A reflection, perhaps, but when I blinked, it disappeared. Driving toward town, the service road seemed to stretch endlessly in my side mirror, as if I'd never traveled it before. By the time I crested the final rise, the gas station sign was barely a speck in the distance. At the pumps, Java jumped down and sniffed at tire tracks leading to the island. They began as if he'd driven straight off the lot. Kneeling, I traced them with my finger. They terminated under the passenger door where Java sat. Inside, I discovered the coffee cup from the man, still half full and lukewarm on the counter. Picking it up, I tested its weight. Java circled behind me with a low growl. Setting the cup down, I wiped its rim. The aroma was grassy, faintly sulfurous. Hours passed as I replayed the night's events. The rain, the stranger's soaked jacket, the glow he'd described. Thoughts of returning to the site weighed heavy, but my legs felt like lead. That afternoon, I closed up early and headed home, Java asleep against the seat. Passing the sheriff's deputy, I rolled down the window and inquired about missing person reports. He shrugged. Desert folk come and go. No one's called it in. At home, I phoned Carrie to say I'd be late. Java perked up as I pulled into the driveway. The house was filled with the warm scent of curry and onions. I found myself in the kitchen with Carrie, who handed me a bowl of rice and lentils. Steam rose in the lamplight as I ate, Java lying at my feet with his head resting on my boot. Through the window, an empty road wound toward distant hills. No lights, no shadows, just the quiet settling of desert night. Later, I spread local maps across the table, tracing the service road in the wash. I searched for any mention of strange lights or sudden engine failures. Only rumors emerged, ghost trucks and desert mirages drifting through whispered stories. Climbing into bed, Java jumped up beside me, his tail thumping softly. I switched off the lamp and stared at the ceiling, the man's wide, frantic eyes replaying in my mind. The tracks stopping abruptly in the sand haunted me. Though I didn't dream, I woke twice to Java's gentle whimpers, each time glancing at the window. A pale glow seemed to drift across the yard, but it was just the streetlight shifting behind the curtains. Morning brought a single, mysterious footprint in the gravel by the gate. Boot tread, with mud still clinging. I checked Carrie's boots, clean. When I stepped into the print, it felt cool and damp, as if recently made. No rain had fallen overnight. Java and I circled the print like detectives, noting it pointed toward the desert and the hills where my pickup had stalled. Inside, I washed up and poured more coffee. The cup trembled in my hand as I renamed the service road on the map, the vanishing track. I couldn't explain how that man had faded into the night, but he'd left marks everywhere, on the road, on the map, deep in my thoughts. My mind kept returning to that liminal space where tires meet soft sand and engines inexplicably die, where a light hovers just beyond the hills. We'd been driving the 2-lane skirting Groom Lake, windows down against the desert heat. The old Subaru Outback coughed on the final stretch. It was 11:47 p.m. when Will tapped my shoulder, pointing ahead. The dashboard clock confirmed the late hour as the headlights began to flicker, dimming until the yellow line barely remained visible. I eased off the gas. "You see that?" Will's voice sounded distant, as if underwater. The headlights brightened momentarily, then went nearly dark again. The engine stalled, gauges dropping to 0. I gripped the steering wheel, flexing my fingers. The desert had swallowed our words, and the radio was nothing but static. We'd been listening to old blues stations, but now even that was gone. The dial felt gummy and unresponsive. I clicked off the headlights and let my eyes adjust to the darkness. Above the road, maybe 50 yards ahead, a soft white-green glow appeared. It hovered 20 feet above the asphalt, suspended as if by invisible wires. Ledger, our lanky Whippet Greyhound mix, lay curled in his bed, ears flicking. He looked up with wide eyes, head tilting like he heard something I couldn't. The orb pulsed once, then brightened until it cast long shadows under the car. Ledger stood, hackles raised, and let out a low whine. I unbuckled and stood in the open driver's door. The orb dipped slightly, as though it noticed me. I could feel a vibration in the air just under my skin. It wasn't sound I heard, but a deep thrumming that made my teeth buzz. I crouched to Ledger's level. He trembled, eyes fixed on the orb. I patted his head, but his fur prickled under my hand. Behind me, Will's phone flashlight shook in his grip, painting dust motes in the light beam. The orb drifted closer, gliding without wind or ripple. We stayed still like animals caught in headlights. I thought about slamming the door, speeding away, but my legs wouldn't move. The orb halted a few feet beyond the grill, bright enough to blind me if I stared. Then it moved slowly, sideways, matching the curve of the road. Will gunned the engine. It roared to life, rattling the doors. I threw the car into drive, tires spinning on the gravel shoulder. The headlights flared back to full, no flicker this time, and we pulled onto the pavement. The orb stayed beside us, gliding over the desert scrub at our 2-lane pace of maybe 40 miles per hour. It never go, closer than 10 feet to the car, never drifted away further, just moved alongside. Will kept one hand on the wheel, the other on the gear shift, eyes wide. Ledger pressed flat against the seat. The radio would flicker to life for a second, some distant AM talk show, then die again, static taking over. The mesa walls rose, framing the highway as we drove. An orb drifted alongside us, its movements smooth and deliberate. Weeks had passed without rain, and the air carried a faint scent of ozone and dust, reminiscent of a distant thunderstorm. I reached out the window, phone in hand, hoping to capture the moment. The orb's glow washed over the screen, but as I tapped record, the display went black. Its underside was seamless, without panels or seams, reflecting the faint starlight with a subtle tilt. Miles of winding highway stretched before us, passing scrub and bluffs. The orb remained silent, its light pulsing steadily like a slow metronome. Then, on a straightaway, it began to rise, not with a streak or roar, but slowly, purposefully. We watched as it climbed above the mesa rim, shrinking to a pale dot against the starfield before shooting straight up and fading into nothing. Normalcy returned to the night. Headlights cut through the empty desert. The car fell silent, engine droning, radio dead. I flicked the overhead light on and off. It blinked once, then darkness. We coasted to a stop past a cattle guard, its bars clinking beneath our tires. Will killed the engine. Ledger, trembling as if he'd run a marathon, hopped down from the seat. I stepped out. The desert was motionless, not a whisper of wind. A waning moon hung above the mesa, and the highway stretched empty in both directions. We climbed back in. Will coaxed Ledger onto the back seat. Silently, I pulled onto the road and drove away. As we neared Rachel, the car returned to normal. Radio on, headlights working. But something felt off. Ledger refused to meet the rearview mirror's gaze, and now, when I drive that stretch, I can't help but scan the sky, half expecting that pale glow to drift silently alongside me. We were a half-mile up the old mining trail when technology began to fail. My phone chirped with a device alert. GPS signal lost. Mia swore, tapping her wrist unit. Zach pulled out his tablet. All three screens blinked into darkness. Our route cut straight through the fenced-off Area 51 boundary. I dismissed the signal loss as a result of the canyon walls, as the sun dipped behind the peaks. The desert sky bled orange and purple as we hiked. Bramble, our lean border collie mix, trotted ahead with her nose skimming the ground, pausing at every rock and shrub to investigate a new scent. We joked nervously about accidentally stumbling into the restricted base area, our laughter masking an underlying tension. At a sharp hairpin turn, a lone juniper clung to the cliffside, while wind rattled dead branches overhead. I flipped my phone over, noticing the GPS signal was still gone. Just an impossible straight white line cutting across the desert core. "That's weird," Zach said, zooming in on the map. The route looked like someone had drawn a perfect vector pointing deeper into the forbidden zone, with no trails or roads in sight. Mia tapped her hiking pole, noting her batteries were full. Something didn't feel right. We tried to shrug off our unease, having navigated tougher terrain before, but this felt different. By twilight, we'd reached a ledge overlooking the salt flats, the moon a bright sliver rising behind the mesa. We spread our packs on a flat rock, sharing water and granola bars while Bramble nosed around our leftovers. At 8:37 p.m., the GPS apps flickered again. All three devices shifted to an alternate route screen, the white line now cutting diagonally across the fenced-off area. Mia shivered. Off her medication, her anxiety was heightened. Then we felt it, a deep, rolling vibration underneath our feet, like a distant truck idling, but stronger, almost pushing us side to side. Zach's knuckles were white on the tablet. "Did you feel that?" I whispered. He nodded. "But there's no road out there." Bramble dropped from the ledge, backing up with raised hackles and a low whine catching in her throat. As suddenly as it began, the vibration stopped. The desert went silent. When Zach suggested we head back, we gathered our gear and retraced the trail, flashlights sweeping the path. I felt oddly deflated, as if something had stolen my breath. Bramble stayed close. Halfway down, moonlight broke through thin clouds, casting pale light onto the scrub. That's when I saw it. Just a flicker, a shadow shifting at the tree line, maybe 30 yards off the trail. A silhouette so vague it could have been a trick of moonlight. My eyes dropped low, scanning the ground. The silhouette glowed green, unblinking. I froze, my mouth going dry. Mia grabbed my arm. "Jake," she said. Before I could respond, the figure snapped backward into darkness. My flashlight beam swept across the spot where it had been. Nothing, just sagebrush swaying in the breeze. Our phones buzzed simultaneously. The trail map had changed, showing something different. The restricted zone boundary had vanished, as if it never existed. Zach exhaled sharply. "This is nuts." We moved quickly through the gloom, our flashlights cutting arcs across the terrain. Something seemed to follow. I'd hear a soft scuff, a toe dragging in sand, a stone brushing against another. Each time I'd spin around, and Bramble would bark once, then fall silent, tail low. At the switchback, strange footprints appeared. Oval shapes pressed lightly into the dirt, larger than our boots, but no deeper than animal tracks. No claw marks, no displaced soil. They simply pointed up the mountain, stopping abruptly at the switchback's edge. Mia knelt down, examining them closely. I joined her, shining my light into the wash below. Tumbleweeds, an old mortar stone where miners once worked. The prints didn't lead to the trail crest. Instead, they pointed into the darkness behind us. Mia swallowed. Okay, let's go. We picked up our pace, boots crunching on loose rock. Bramble ran ahead, then paused, head tilted, ears alert. I kept my voice calm. We're almost there. A mile later, we crested the final ridge. The wash road stretched out, moonlight turning the asphalt into a silver ribbon. We relaxed slightly. Then another phone buzz. The map now showed 2 routes, the wash road and a thin white line cutting through the desert, pointing directly at the base gate. Are you kidding me? I muttered, hurling the phone to the ground. We didn't stop. Bramble raced ahead, barking once at the cars. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys. The engine sputtered, then roared. Gravel crunched under our tires. Headlights scanned the desert. In the rearview mirror, only darkness, an empty roadway, dust rising behind our taillights. I downloaded the trail data back at home, and everything looked clean. The 3 GPS tracks followed the official trail perfectly, with no glitches or strange lines, just a consistent bump in elevation every half mile. As I went to delete the event from my log, something caught my eye. Another track entry timestamped at 8:45 p.m., with coordinates deep inside the base perimeter, right where those glowing eyes had flickered earlier. I highlighted the row and pressed delete. My computer beeped and shut down. My phone died too. Through the window, a low hum drifted in, distant and steady, like sand shifting beneath steel, and then the night swallowed it again. The radar bunker was silent when it happened. I was midway through the graveyard shift at 3 a.m. with the cold, still desert outside. Hoshi, my German shepherd, was curled under the water console, having come in with me after I'd tried to put her in the kennel. I'd left a chair tilted back so she could slide underneath and rest. Suddenly, the screen flickered. A perfect circle appeared, glowing soft gray against the black background, too round to be a storm cell or a flock of birds. It zipped in from the south edge, paused for exactly 2 seconds, then shot east at a speed that would destroy any known aircraft. I leaned forward, squinting. The blip was tiny, just 3 pixels wide, but unmistakable. I keyed the mic. Control, we've got an unidentified blip. A crackle, then silence. My radio was dead. I toggled panels. No interference lights, no alarms. Everything looked normal. Pashi, you seeing this? She lifted her head, ears forward, then lay back down. When I checked the track history, the pulse return was clean, a perfect echo with no trail, no debris field. As I tried to plot a course, data lines went dead. The blip vanished from the screen, only to reappear seconds later on the west edge. Same pattern. For the next hour, I tracked 6 more identical circles, all darting in, pausing, then racing off. No altitude data, no radar signature, except that single dot. My heartbeat sank low in my chest. At 4 a.m., the supervisor's voice came over the intercom, flat and clipped. Tech Larkin, step into my office, now. I closed the feed and walked down the corridor, Hoshi padding at my heels. The hall lights were dimmed for energy savings, though we'd never had a problem before. During a blackout, my footsteps and Hoshi's nails echoed on the metal grate. The office door stood ajar, and Colonel Reeves sat behind his desk, hands steepled, alone in the room. His gaze locked onto mine. Report only what the instruments show, he said. Never trust what your eyes tell you. Understand? My mouth went dry. Sir, the instruments showed exactly what I said. He leaned forward. When the instruments fail to show something, do not mention it. Understood? I nodded. Yes, sir. He tapped a folder. Log it as false returns. End of conversation. Back at the console, I hesitated before punching in the false returns code. Hoshi whined, and I scratched her head. Weird stuff kept happening over the next few weeks. Circle blips returned, sometimes at 2, sometimes at 5 a.m. I logged them all under false returns. My cortex looked at me funny. Ghost radar murmurs floated around, but no one asked details. One night, Hoshi wouldn't settle. She paced, ears up, a low growl in her throat. The bunker's hum sounded hollow, like a drumless echo. The screen flickered and a circle appeared, this time staying put. It hovered at the center of the display for almost 5 minutes, silent and unblinking. As I reached to key the mic, the The radio clicked to life. Static, then a synthetic voice. Object confirmed. The echo made Hoshi stiffen, hackles raised. I jumped, but the screen went dark before I could respond. Slamming keys, all panels powered down. Emergency lights bathed the bunker in red. Hoshi barked once, sharp. "What the hell?" I whispered. 15 minutes later, the tech crew arrived. All systems were back online. The logs showed no anomalies, no power glitches. Every console reading was normal. The circle never appeared in the record. They found me hunched under the console, Hoshi's nose nudging my hand. The crew chief asked if I was okay. I forced a laugh. "Just a power hiccup." He frowned but waved me off. "Get some sleep, Larkin." I went home early that day. Pashi slept at my feet while I stared out the living room window at the desert. The sun was bright. Too bright. I waited for shadows to move. The next shift, I caught it again. One perfect circle, higher speed, further path. I felt sick. Hoshi wouldn't come into the bunker. She pressed against the door, whining. The maintenance bay was quiet, just me and my flashlight, amid the steady HVAC rumble. Around 1:15 a.m., the hum suddenly cut out. An eerie silence descended, like someone had pressed mute. A chill crept under my collar, making my palms sweat, not from the freezer's blast, but something else. I flicked on the overhead lights. They buzzed briefly, then glowed normally. Probably a tripped breaker, I thought. My dog Pippa, a skinny Australian cattle dog mix I'd smuggled in, lifted her head from her bed and growled low. She'd been with me every night shift for months, but this was different. Crouching by the console, I checked the gauges, pressure levels, coolant temps, airflow rates, all normal. Yet the silence lingered. I tapped my shoulder mic. Central responded with nothing but static. Pippa padded to the window, overlooking the yard. I followed her gaze. Days earlier, my supervisor had called me in. He told me to classify something as static, mentioning he'd seen planes in the air that didn't exist on radar. "You're not aircraft tech," he'd said. "Just mark it down." Back at my station, I logged the circle as static. Driving home that evening, I noticed the empty sky near the base perimeter. That night, I set my alarm for 2 a.m. Hoshi stirred when it rang. Looking out the window, I saw only bright stars, no movement. The next day's log showed 3 more perfect circles, silent returns darting in and out. Each started near a distant mesa, paused near our bunker, then raced away. My hands shook, filling out the report. Hoshi paced, watching the window expectantly. Now, I watched the skies more than my screen, wondering if those circles are tracing invisible paths, waiting to reveal themselves. Hoshi sits by the door, ears up, ready to warn me of their return. The desert outside was unnaturally still. No wind stirred the grasses. I stepped toward the window, my heartbeat slowing as I scanned the empty lot. Something moved at the bay's far edge, an angular shape barely shoulder height, with edges too sharp and precise to be human. It slipped past so smoothly that it bent the light, leaving a curved shadow that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Pippa barked once and pressed against my side, her tail rigid. I backed from the glass, trying to switch on my phone. The screen remained black. My walkie-talkie was my next attempt. "Maintenance here," I transmitted. "System silent. Cold air. Something just moved outside." Seconds stretched. Only static answered. Pulling my jacket tighter, I edged toward the exit with Pippa whining softly behind me. The hallway's fluorescent lights flickered 3 times before stabilizing. I closed my eyes, counting to 10. When I looked again, the bay's walls looked normal. Maintenance schedules and safety posters hung undisturbed. But something felt fundamentally wrong. I glanced down at Pippa. She trembled, hackles raised. I knelt and scratched her ears. "Let's go," I whispered. Halfway to the main stairwell, I paused at the server room door. The usual fan hum was absent. Absolute silence. I cracked the door open. Red indicator lights blinked weakly across the equipment racks. Emergency LEDs cast a dull orange glow. My reflection in the black cabinet glass showed wide eyes and sweat-matted hair. Then the door clicked shut behind me. I spun around. No breeze, just a soft metallic thunk. The handle wouldn't move. "Pippa," I said quietly. She skidded to the door, scratching frantically. My kicks met solid steel. Phone dead. Walkie-talkie crackling. "Anyone?" I called. The static erupted into a high-pitched whistle and died completely. I rested my forehead against the cool metal. Pippa pressed against my leg. I drove away without looking back, headlights dancing across the empty highway. The bay doors loomed, shut against the yard. Outside, the moon was hidden behind clouds, the desert silent. I walked the perimeter fence looking for footprints, ints, or signs. Nothing. Back at my truck, I loaded Pippa into the passenger seat, then sat inside with the door open. I stared at the base entrance, floodlights cutting through the night until they hit the clouds. Everything faded to gray. Pippa licked my cheek. I scratched behind her ear. The engine roared to life. That night at home, I lay awake, listening for the hum. Pippa slept at the foot of the bed, twitching in her dreams. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about the shape slipping past the window. Shapeless, angular, bending the light. I wondered if I'd hear that humming again, if I'd ever walk into that bay and feel the air vibrate under my skin. Down the stairs, I checked my watch. 1:27 a.m., 12 minutes since the hum died. My phone buzzed on the stairwell landing. 2 missed calls from my girlfriend Sophia. It rang again. I answered on the second ring. "Everything okay?" Sophia asked. "Yeah," I said, rubbing my neck. "Just trouble with the power." "You sound weird." She paused. "You sure you're alone?" "I'm fine," I said, louder than I meant. She sighed. "All right, come home safe." The line went dead. I carried Pippa the rest of the way, steps clicking behind me. In the main lobby, security cameras dotted the walls. I reflexively checked the monitors above the desk. All feeds active, showing empty halls. The bay doors closed tight. I reached the exit and swiped my badge. Nothing. The door stayed locked. I swiped faster, harder. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement on one screen, a dark shape darting past the bay window. I punched the release button. The door clicked open. Pippa hurried out before me, nose to the ground. I followed, breathing relief in the cool night air. The lights were steady again. Pippa licked my hand, her nose warm against my knuckles. I didn't ask her what she saw. We had stepped out into the hall after I slammed the door behind us. My dog barked, low at first, then frantic. I took a deep breath and tested the door again. This time it opened with a quiet click, as if someone had unlocked it from the other side. I stepped onto the coarse sand, the desert cold around me with that dry chill unique to this area, past Groom Lake. My border collie Ranger stood at the camp's edge, nose quivering toward a rock face about 30 yards away. A single sharp bark escaped him. I clicked on my headlamp and followed his gaze. He pawed at a boulder, looking up at me expectantly. When I pointed the beam, I saw it. A soft blue glow pulsing in rhythm with what seemed like my own heartbeat. Pale light reflected off the stone striations, fading and brightening in an eerie dance. Crouching low, I moved closer. The pulses were steady, slow, rhythmic. I tapped my chest. The pattern matched perfectly. Lifting my camera, I hit record, but only static filled the lens. I shook it, and the display blinked before going completely dark. After 5 blinks, the glow vanished. Darkness swallowed the rocks. Ranger wound around my boot, nudging me with his nose. I checked my watch, 4:47 a.m. Somehow, 2 hours and 34 minutes had disappeared. My campsite looked untouched. The stove was still warm, a ghostly wisp of flame lingering on the grill. My water bottle sat half-filled, exactly as I'd left it. Inside the tent, I frantically pulled the memory card, but my laptop showed only empty folders. Sunrise crept over the mesa rim, revealing something unsettling. Fresh footprints surrounded my tent, mine and Ranger's, but also another set, larger, deeper. They led directly toward the restricted fence, ending abruptly at the barbed wire with no gate, no break. A wind gust stirred tumbleweeds, trash swirling in their wake. Shaking, I packed up quickly. Something had happened, something I couldn't explain. I loaded everything onto my pack frame, with Ranger perched on my shoulders for a better view. At my truck, his dash clock blinked strangely, as if disconnected from power. I checked the headlights. They worked fine. Starting the engine, I drove back along Desert Highway, constantly checking the rearview mirror. The base fence looked exactly the same, towers evenly spaced, floodlights dormant in daylight. No trucks, no movement. In Rachel, I pulled into the first gas station, my legs shaking. Ranger nudged the glass door as I went inside. The clerk seemed puzzled by my early arrival, but I just nodded, my voice tight. Over coffee, I scrolled through my camera's menu. Battery at 70%, but no recordings. The date and time were correct, yet all footage had vanished. I reviewed yesterday's still images, a campfire, my dinner plate, Ranger drinking water. No trace of the strange pulsing glow. That night, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, a pale light flickered against my eyelids, counting minutes that seemed to have slipped away. At dawn, Ranger's whine pulled me from restless thoughts. Through the window, the mesa looked unchanged. Desert heat rippled softly, but something felt different, like I'd passed through an invisible threshold. I left the camera on the desk, lens caps sealed. Ranger lay by the door, ears twitching at each wind-rattled scream. Staring at the ceiling, I wondered if I'd blink and miss something again. Those unexplained pulses, the erased hours, footprints that seemed to walk themselves to the base's edge and back. 10 minutes into my dusk patrol, it started. Just me, the old Cessna 172, and the engine's steady drone. Suddenly, ATC went silent. I keyed the mic at Indian Springs, only static answered. The GPS backup showed no signal. Then the radar scope flickered with an unexpected blip, an unassigned transponder code 8820 Alpha. I tapped the identify button. Nothing responded. The speed read 2100 knots. No jet engine roar, no sonic boom, just my prop wash. And it was racing directly toward Groom Lake at 25,000 feet. I'd been flying steady when the blip first appeared on my scope. Off my left wingtip, something kept perfect formation about 50 miles out. My stomach knotted as I scanned the empty desert sky below. No contrails, no navigation lights, just clean air and deepening pink light from the sinking sun. I called the tower on guard channel. Silence. Then finally, a clipped officer's voice. "You're not clear to identify that target. Maintain heading and altitude. Do not deviate." I acknowledged, but my fingers tingled on the yoke. My heart pounded as I leveled off at 5,000 feet. The white salt flats glowed beneath me. The horizon flared orange as the sun dipped lower. Then, without warning, the ghost plane on my scope flickered and vanished. One moment it was there, the next my radar was blank. No glitch beam, no trace. I slowed, cockpit lights dimmed, and peered out. The sky was empty. No shape, no silhouette, no contrail. Static answered when I called base. As I descended below 10,000 feet, something caught my eye. A row of military trucks rolling across the desert road. They sealed off a stretch of highway, laying down spikes. Black tarped cargo, no symbols or markings. I circled low at 200 feet, watching men in dark uniforms unload crates into shallow trenches. Searchlights cut through desert dust but never looked up. My engine sputtered briefly, as if the air itself had changed. Then power leveled off. The trucks shrank to brown dots in my wing mirror. Another radio call came. Urgent, low, clear the frequency. Then nothing. I followed the road back to the airfield, blood pumping. The runway lights blazed full as I landed and taxied in, the strange encounter still churning in my mind. In the secluded hangar, my heart raced as I questioned the mechanic about the highway barricade. His response was cryptic. Base ops remained tight-lipped, claiming it was sealed for routine maintenance. I stepped out into the desert, a cool breeze brushing against my skin. My elongated shadows stretched across the tarmac as I scanned the horizon toward Groom Lake. Nothing seemed out of place, save for that fleeting radar blip lingering in my memory. Later that evening, I brewed coffee on the patio with Huckleberry, my yellow lab whose snoring could rival a tractor's rumble. He nudged my boot while I gazed skyward. The stars hung unchanged, pinpricks of light offering no hint of the day's earlier mystery. I reviewed my flight log meticulously. No errors, no unusual annotations about ghost targets, just standard entries of time, altitude, and fuel consumption. The radar recording had been wiped completely clean, as if the incident never occurred. Inside, my radio scanner continued to emit a steady static across all channels. Huckleberry followed me as I poured a final cup of coffee and stepped onto the porch. The desert stretched before me, silent and vast. Climbing into bed, I listened for that elusive hum, wondering if I'd ever witness such an unexplained moment again. I apologize, but it seems like the text you intended to share is incomplete or was not fully pasted. Could you provide the full text you would like me to rewrite? I'm ready to help you restructure the paragraph while maintaining its original meaning.